basketball on the season. One game over the 500 mark, coming off a victory over the Utah Jazz. They take both games against Utah, both of which were played out in Salt Lake City, and they end things going back-to-back. The frustrating and difficult loss, which we'll get into against the Los Angeles Clippers, but then end things the following night on an up note with that win over Utah. Once again, Dan Avone and Evan Giddings, we hit the All-Star break. No basketball for Thursday. They take on the Los Angeles Lakers and begin what is, quote-unquote, the second half of the campaign, but realistically only about 30 games remaining on the 82-game schedule for the 23-24 season. But let's just take a look back at the week that was. And Ev, just like anything else, it was not without fireworks and eventful as usual. How'd you see things?
First of all, always fun to be with you, Dan. But I think that, look, there's nothing disinteresting about where the Warriors are at right now, whether they're playing poorly, whether they're playing like they have, having won 8 of their last 12 games entering the All-Star break, kind of at this, I don't want to say, dog days of August sort of spot in the season, but that's sort of what it feels like for a lot of teams around them, right? I mean, Utah is kind of floundering. You see teams behind the Warriors now like Houston in the Western Conference falling out of favor. It looks like the Warriors now have positioned themselves very nicely to, pretty much have their floor be the play-in. Like right now, they appear to be a lock for the 10 seed. The question is how far that they can climb, and that's what we're going to try and figure out over the next 29 games, because this is a very different basketball team than the one that we saw at the beginning of the season, even one that we saw midway through the season. So it feels like the Warriors are finding themselves, but they still do have some variables to reinsert or readjust, because we saw someone like Klay Thompson come off the bench this week, which you can take a victory lap on in a moment, as well as Chris Paul getting back into the fold, how he's going to fit, and then how do the Warriors continue to maintain this high level of play, which of course has resulted in some marquee victories, though they did blow the game against the Clippers, did have the win the last time we saw each other on Saturday against Phoenix in miraculous fashion. So I think this is a team that's playing certainly its best basketball of the season. The question after the All-Star break is going to be whether that's good enough.
It's a good place to start, because when I think you look at the way it's stacked in the Western Conference, Minnesota's a team that you pretty much, in terms of their personnel and who they are, you know that's a good basketball team. And the Thunder, same thing. We know who they are, right? We know it's a young team spearheaded by superstars like that of Jalen Williams and SGA and, of course, Chet Holmgren. Same thing with the Clippers. An older team, but we saw them this past week, star-studded, and James Harden in a new role. They didn't have Kawhi Leonard, and the Nuggets are the Nuggets. And the reason why I mention that, when you stack up the Golden State Warriors to just about everybody else out in the Western Conference, and as we sit here at the All-Star break, as just about everybody is prone to do, that are doing shows similar to this around the country for their respective teams, and you're handicapping the remaining games and the rest of the season for whatever team, here obviously it's the Golden State Warriors, I think the Warriors are rare in this regard, in that they're unlike the before-mentioned teams in the Western Conference, because there are still moving parts. As I mentioned, I know who the Dallas Mavericks are. I know who's coming off their bench. Their starting 5 are pretty much, it's something that is you can roll out and you know what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. Same with the Kings. Same with the Lakers, although there could be some tinkering from time to time. But the Golden State Warriors continue to make changes. And the reason why that's notable is that it is still a work in progress. I don't know how much better Podziemski's going to get. I don't know how much better Jonathan Kuminga is going to continue as he continues to take huge strides. What's it going to be like now with the addition of Chris Paul coming off the bench, along with that of Klay Thompson? Does Trayce Jackson-Davis get more minutes? And I guess these moving pieces that I refer to and this sort of level of uncertainty with the Golden State Warriors, unlike that of the other teams, is also, I think, another way of looking at this team through the lens of some level of optimism, in that it can only get better. And again, when I compare them to the rest of the Western Conference, and I think about the Golden State Warriors, I'm like, yeah, okay, you can say that they're the 10th seed and they got a long way to go, but they just found their starting lineup. You can go as far as to say they just recognize their quote-unquote identity, which is something we continually talk about. They just figured out a rotation by now having two Hall of Famers coming off the bench in Chris Paul and Klay Thompson. There's a lot to get behind and excited about when you talk about the Golden State Warriors going forward.
Yeah, and I think it's as much about the Warriors discovering themselves as it is also about this is typically the time in the year when teams that don't feel like they are either committed to winning or have a ceiling to win or are in a position where they're defending some sort of championship experience or background like the Warriors are, they tend to fall off the table. I mean, Utah is not a team that is ready to compete. That's why they traded 3 of their rotation players at the deadline. Houston is a team that has reverted back to probably where a lot of people thought they were after a hot start to the season. And then Portland and San Antonio are absolute garbage. So, like, it's as much about, I think, the Warriors kind of separating, from the bottom 5 as it is also the bottom 5 being the bottom 5. Now, again, the Warriors have teams like the Lakers, the Kings, and the Mavericks in front of them. And I think you're right, Dan. This is also the time in the year where we begin to see what everyone else looks like because everyone else has their identity that they're finding while the Warriors are doing their thing as well. So all of that becomes solidified either because you begun to play good basketball or because you're just running out of time. Like you have no choice but to lean in one way or the other. And I think fortunately for the Warriors, it coincided with both the deadline, so they weren't going to make any moves playing better basketball, but also has coincided with, all right, you got basically 30 games left to show how far you can get in a Western Conference that is pretty top-heavy. I mean, the top 4 are not going anywhere, and now it's really just about the ceiling. How far can you push, L.A., Sacramento, Dallas, but then maybe even New Orleans or Phoenix? I think that is a lot to ask as far as the 5 or the 6. But there are teams in front of them right now that they can certainly jump, especially the one right now in Los Angeles. And then you start to look at, okay, how do they match up with the teams at the top of the West? How do they face them? And one thing that the Warriors do have going for them is something that's flown under the radar the whole year, which is how difficult their schedule has been. They'll have the 6th easiest schedule the final 29 games of the season. So if they can continue to play this high level of basketball, I think that, look, it might not mean that they're going to all of a sudden run off and make a deep postseason run, but it certainly means that they're going to win a lot of basketball games if they play with balance and consistency like we've seen them do over the last 2 or 3 weeks.
They currently sit at the number 10 seed, 27 up, 26 down, 1 game over the 500 mark. And if you just woke up out of a 6-month slumber and you said, whoa, the Warriors are at the 10th seed, 1 game over 500, and there's optimism, well, this has been a tumultuous season, chaotic up to this point. And the Warriors have dealt with the ebb and flow in 27 and 26. When you think about where this team was a month ago, you will take it. So when you think about going forward, obviously you want to get in at that 6th seed so you can avoid, much like that of last year where they were a 6th seed and played Sacramento in the first round, who were a 3rd seed. That way, obviously, you avoid the play-in game. Realistically, catching the Pelicans and or the Phoenix Suns, making up 5 games with about 30 and change left to go, it's a tall order. But I would say this about the Golden State Warriors, not only when it comes to the 6th seed and catching the Pelicans who currently sit there. The Pelicans, by the way, have been playing much better of late, or the Phoenix Suns, a team that they beat earlier this year or earlier this week. What we continue to see is that there is very little difference, at least in my estimation, from the very top of the conference, that being Minnesota, OKC, the Clippers, the Nuggets, and the Golden State Warriors. If we're to use the games that they have played against those teams this year, Ev, I just don't see, as far as talent being stacked up against one another, that the Golden State Warriors are that far away.
No, and I think obviously what they have on everyone outside of maybe Denver is experience. I mean, they have players that have been in those biggest moments and the biggest times, which has made kind of the down the stretch. I think they're about 18 and 18 or 17 and 18 in these clutch games. It makes kind of the 500 record down the stretch of these basketball games in which they have not been able to hold on to big leads a bit perplexing. And you wonder if that's something that's going to right itself or if it's not. But look, I mean, I think Golden State would take a first-round matchup with Oklahoma City. Like, I think that they would not mind seeing Minnesota in the first round. Really, I think every team in the West, to me, is vulnerable at the top except for Denver, which is ironic because they're the lowest of the 4 at the top of the table. But no, I mean, I think the Warriors right now are in a position. Yes, they're starting to look around the West, but they're also just starting to figure out, okay, how are they or we going to play the best version of ourselves? How are we going to extract that? And I think we've begun to see really a settling in of younger guys finally getting some opportunities. Kuminga, obviously, but now Podziemski looks like he's going to be someone that, at the very least, if he's not starting, and we can talk about that in a moment, he's probably going to be closing a lot of games. How does Chris Paul factor into that? Draymond Green has stabilized the 5 position in a way that not many people, I think, foresaw when he came back. But is he someone that can match up at a postseason series? Is he someone that for the last, and this is also part of it too, like we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves. We do need to think about how this team, and maybe my biggest question for this group is how they can sustain a level of play for 30 games or for the last 2 months of the year, because it looks like they're beginning to find themselves here in February, which would be the first above 500 month this season since October. But, okay, we saw them 3 of the last 4 games. I think they stumbled a bit and fell out. They lost a bit of steam. They lost some fuel down the stretch because you had 3 and 4 nights. Well, you're going to have extended stretches where you're playing 5 games in 7 nights, 3 and 4. How do the Warriors play on the back end of those games, and how do they keep themselves fresh? Because at the end of the day, yes, I'm with you that you look around the rest of the conference, and there are a ton of teams that necessarily scare you. But I think what would scare me the most is, again, the war of attrition. How do the Warriors keep themselves healthy for the final 30 games while also peaking at the right time?
Yeah, I think just to take that a step further is that Steph Curry, they can ill afford to go down with an injury, which he typically does over the last 5 years.
Or work him too hard, yeah.
And so that they're very thin. While this team has depth like they haven't had in recent memory, but when you start talking about their stars, and namely Steph Curry, because let's face it, this team will go as far as he takes them. He has been out with injuries, some worse than others, whether it was the shoulder, the sublation, is that how you say that word? That currently John Morant is dealing with right now.
Oh, with his shoulder,
subluxation, that's the word I'm trying to get to. He dealt with that a couple of years ago. He had the knee injury against Houston when he slipped on the floor. There's been some, and that happens when you're soon to be 36 years of age. This year, they can ill afford. When they finally put it together, Steph has got to stay healthy. I mean, that just goes without saying. But let's just get into this. When we talk about that victory over the Utah Jazz, and you and I were kicking this around before we went on the air, it was a game that they clearly could have lost.
Yeah.
If Sexton, if he connects on that wide open 3, it was a good look at it, game over. But the Golden State Warriors do come away with wins. But what we're recognizing, and this is nothing new, is this continuing pattern of having a huge lead late in games and squandering the majority of that advantage. Is there something you can point at? Is there an area of concern that they need to address? What exactly do you think is the cause for the Golden State Warriors blowing big leads late in games?
Well, I don't think, number one, blowing a big lead is not uncommon in the NBA, but the amount of blown leads that they have unfortunately suffered has been pretty eye-opening. Now, it's interesting because up until, I think, the Clippers game in which they led by as many as 15, I don't think 15, honestly, in the NBA is a huge lead, Dan, but it is something to note, especially when you're up by 19 against Utah, and then it comes down to a final shot or a final turnover from John Collins, which he launched that ball into the stratosphere. You start to think about, okay, well, up until that point, the last 12 games, those are pretty much the only 2 games in which they've blown a big lead or a sizable advantage in the second half. So I wonder if you look at that as one-offs, or are they falling back into, because it's a different looking team. Like, they blew some leads with Draymond earlier in the year, but Kuminga wasn't starting. The rotations weren't necessarily secure. You didn't have GP2 back. I think Chris Paul was involved in some of those losses as well. Like, do you look at those as, okay, well, they're reverting back to who they were earlier this year? Or I kind of look at those 2 games as just they're trying to get to the All-Star break. Like, they're tired, and they've played a condensed schedule off of course, tragedy. So they're trying to get to their week-long All-Star break, which I think will help them as well. Again, that just kind of feeds into my point. I am worried about those losses, and the reason why I think that they have blown double-digit leads repeatedly this season, I think more than any other team, would be because they run out of gas. And this is an older team that too many times offensively down the stretch, you just watch them play, they're looking for Steph to make a shot, And it's not like they're trying to go for the dagger, but this is where I want to see Wiggins get aggressive, Kuminga get aggressive, because sometimes you don't have or you're not afforded the opportunity to just throw up threes and they're going to go in. You're going to have to create offense inside of the three-point line or without a jump shot. And there's not many players on the Warriors right now that can create either for themselves or for others at the rim outside of their wings. And too often, I thought in those two games, the Clippers and Utah, you could make a case that they should have won one, lost the other. They ended up doing that. I felt like they were a bit, like they weren't assertive enough for me. And I think that's also a question I have moving forward. How assertive can their wings be when teams just lock in on Steph down the stretch of games? Because it's funny, the two games that the Warriors lost in their last 10, Steph went for 60, and he shot it 30 times and went for 41 against the Clippers. So clearly, when he is the only offensive option, they struggle to hold leads, and I don't think that's a coincidence.
I think you nailed it. And the reason why I talk about them blowing leads, because I'm not sure that it's just isolated to this past week. It's sort of been a pattern going back to Sacramento. There's a handful of games. It's been littered throughout the campaign. And I think you just nailed it. The Golden State Warriors, and you're right, a 15-point lead means nothing with the three ball being what it is in today's NBA. But when things, or as Allen Iverson used to say, when those butt cheeks get tight and the Warriors find themselves and they become aware that 15-point lead is now down to single digits. Ed, let me ask you this. Let me just back up for a second. When the Golden State Warriors are playing well, what is it that we always talk about? The ball's moving.
Yeah.
The ball's hopping, as they like to say. It's going side to side. Wiggins is involved. They're out and running. They're throwing to the dunker spot, the tic-tac-toe with Draymond, alley-ooping to Kuminga or GP2. Oh, that Warrior basketball is so much fun to watch. They sort of rewrote the way the game is played. Actually, it was Kerr sort of stealing from that of Popovich, his former mentor. But that's Warriors basketball at its best, and that is returned. You can clearly see over the last couple of weeks that style of play has returned to the Golden State Warriors. However, in closing moments, when things get tight and are hanging in the balance, they revert back to a two-man game. Suddenly it becomes Draymond crossing the timeline, going DHO with one guy, and that's Steph Curry. He looks for one guy, and that's Steph Curry, and then Steph Curry, knowing it's a close game, knowing he's the guy, will hold on to that thing, and he just starts probing. He's pounding the rock, and he's just looking, and he's probing for a lane. He's looking for that step-back three, and/or what he'll do when he realizes that he's double or triple team, he'll dish to Wiggins, but it's so late in the clock. They've lost all that continuity. It was clear against Phoenix. It was very clear against Utah that they get into this one-dimensional, here comes Steph, and it's all about number 30 and nobody else.
Yeah, and that's why you do wonder about him wearing down, not as far as like getting injured, but just wearing down over the course of a game, because I think Kerr has made a concentrated effort to not play him more than 35 minutes unless he absolutely has to. And that's because he's trying to keep him fresh. Like, Steph is 35 going on 36. He's kind of a smaller player. He's not as physically imposing and can't, use his strength in order to just muscle off players and get to the basket the way other superstars do. That's never been his game. So where does he need some help? I mean, I would say it's secondary or third options. Now, you do have, like, the ball popping is something that is synonymous with Warriors basketball. But in the playoffs, when things get bogged down, you kind of do need a one-on-one player, and I think Curry can be that guy. But it can't be from, like, the moment he comes into the game in the fourth quarter with 8.5 minutes left, up 10. It can't be just basically shrinking the game. And I know as much as you'd like to take time off the clock, then you become susceptible to, okay, we have to execute in a half-court offense. And I'm just not sure if, for example, Kuminga and Wiggins aren't as involved or, quite honestly, turtled up. Like, they turtled up a bit, especially against the Clippers, but also against Utah. I didn't think that they were very assertive. I didn't think they wanted to get much into that game, and they kind of shrunk away. And that's understandable for someone like Kuminga. I mean, he's 21 years old. This is his first year getting consistent run in impactful games, winning games in the starting lineup in which he knows he's going to be staying there. Meanwhile, I'm looking at Wiggins like this is kind of where the Warriors need you to offensively go down, either attack the tin, get a bucket, and take some pressure off Steph Curry. Because the offense cannot be, in my opinion, Steph running pick and roll for 8 minutes straight down the stretch of a basketball game. That's not going to be, unless, of course, you're getting stops on the other end, which they've done a better job of, but eventually teams are going to make shots, and then that momentum begins to fall, and you start to fall into the here we go again. Like, the Warriors should have probably 3 or 4 more wins than they do, and I don't think they do just because they're asking 30 to do everything down the stretch of these games. And eventually, I'm not saying that he can't. For example, he hit the game winner against Phoenix and bailed him out of a tight back and forth affair with the Suns. But that's not always going to happen. Like if Curry makes half his game winners, that's a really good number. But that also means you're losing half the games because you're in so many tight ones. So you'd like to be able to see them hold leads, especially because like a team in Utah, you just beat them by 20 a couple of games ago. That's a team you should handle even if it's on the road. I'm not saying it's an easy environment per se, but that was a game you could easily make the case that they should have lost, and I think it's because they got tight and everyone just looked at Curry to try and take him home.
Well, there's 2 ways to look at that. Do they get tight when you talk about Jonathan Kuminga and Andrew Wiggins, for example? Because they don't want the ball in their hands in the closing moments? Or I think it's more because of what it is that I just laid out, that philosophically, suddenly, whether this is handed down from Steve Kerr and or Steph Curry just takes it upon himself that, okay, now we're going to become a one-dimensional team. I think they would much rather prefer for that ball to continue to go side to side. And if Curry's isolated, then go ahead and take it. But if not, let Wiggins get involved. But they need to touch it earlier in the clock. For whatever reason, if it's Kerr that's just simply saying, okay, ISO, just give it to, it's a close game. Here you go, number 30, take over. But it's difficult if you're Kuminga, especially a younger player, and or Andrew Wiggins, to suddenly say, okay, no, you got the ball in your hands, you go. But in the back of their head, they're like, well, I shouldn't be taking the shot because, I think that this is Steph Curry time. I mean, they played the Los Angeles Clippers and they won that game. Oh, that's the game they lost. I'm sorry. And you looked at Steph Curry pounding the rock, and you know who he looked like? James Harden. That's what James Harden used to do. But James Harden doesn't even do that anymore. James Harden's a new basketball player that doesn't just simply hold on to the ball for 18 to 22 seconds of a shot clock. He's distributing. Who beat the Golden State Warriors down the stretch?
Norman Powell.
It was Norman Powell from the corner. Exactly. And that's, James Harden's not even James Harden anymore. So this idea that it's all got to be Steph-centric, I'm with you, yeah. Take some of that load off of his shoulders, but is that something that Steph is initiating on his own, or is it Steve Kerr that's handing that edict down that it's Steph and everybody else get out of the way? I think it's difficult to blame Andrew Wiggins and or Jonathan Kuminga. Like, you guys are too timid down the stretch. If they were entrusted, hey, listen, you guys are involved in a close game in the fourth quarter, just like that. If it was in the first or second or third quarter, go. You got a green light. I don't think that's necessarily the case, and it might be the reason for a lot of what we've seen, which has been just sort of ugly in terms of squandering big leads.
And I wonder how fans feel about those blown leads, and if they feel like that's something that is kind of just a one-off. I think Curry even used that term after the Clippers game. It's just a one-off. Or if after the Utah game you still had those kind of concerns. So 888-957-9570. Also, kind of, I think what we want to get into is, the ceiling for this team. Dan's going to take a victory lap as far as Klay Thompson and Brandon Podziemski. And I do want to dig into that further because I think it's representative of where the Warriors are at. And maybe not turning a corner in terms of wins, but turning a corner in terms of mentality and role changes, because they're also going to have another future Hall of Famer that's got to come back and figure out where he fits into this thing, being Chris Paul. So, I think Chris Paul is someone that, for example, in the Utah game, could have helped settle a frenetic last few minutes and maybe help them, cruise a little easier to a win instead of hoping that Colin Sexton misses a three at the horn. But then again, that means that maybe Podziemski's not on the floor, or I don't know, maybe you play even smaller. Like, the Warriors got a lot of tough decisions to make, but I think we touched on this last week, Dan. I think they have good decisions, or they have problems that you'd like to have, as opposed to figuring out who the hell we are at this point in the season.
You know, to answer your question, who's going to get less time and Chris Paul coming back to the lineup, I think you've seen the last of Moses Moody.
Oh, yeah. No, he's...
Because Moses Moody, who is, we point out, it's just a numbers game because of the position he played. If Steph is now going back to the bench, and if he's going to get his minutes, and if Chris Paul is going to get his minutes, no one's touching Podziemski's minutes. Well, guess who you're going to see less and less of?
Well, I also hate to break it to people, but Lester Quinones is higher on the depth chart than Moses Moody is.
Lester Quinones, is he still... Did he sign a contract yet?
No, but that's probably a decision the Warriors will make because, I mean, you save money every day that he's on a two-way deal, and you don't actually have to sign him until he reaches a certain amount of games. So they save money that way. But I guess that he would probably be the 14th spot on the roster.
All right, we'll talk about Lester Quinones, who is now a piece of the rotation. We'll get into Steph. We'll get into much more of the other Splash brother, that being Klay Thompson, who is now, for the first time in 11 years and like 728 consecutive games, no longer a starter. All that and much more. We're just getting our feet wet. Welcome to Warriors This Week. It is Evan Giddings. It's Dan Devone. Thanks for joining us. We'll have much more when we continue right after this quick timeout.
Hey, what's going on? It's Willard and Dibs for Safeway. Head to Safeway this week for the...
has sort of been, I guess, the operative word this year for Warrior basketball. Victory over the Utah Jazz as they're able to go back-to-back and end things one game over the 500 mark, and they will take it. As Ev had alluded to, the schedule gets much easier from here on out. They return to play coming up on Thursday with a date against the Los Angeles Lakers, the team that is right in front of them, a half game in front of the Golden State. And then after that, as Ev also alluded to, it gets much easier. The Charlottes of the world, then a date with Washington, at Washington, not long thereafter. So some of these cupcake games that have been few and far between are on the slate for the Golden State Warriors going forward. We're opening up the phone lines officially at 888-957-9570. That's 888-957-9570. We're talking about the Golden State Warriors and more specifically the lineup change. After 727, 728 consecutive starts, now Klay Thompson finds himself, after 11 years, coming off the bench. We want to get your thoughts. It was successful, certainly, against Utah, as now it's Brandon Podziemski, the kid, who is inserted into the starting lineup alongside Steph Curry, and those two obviously have been able to play well together. Let's open things up with Austin out in San Jose. Austin joins the big program. What's going on this morning, Austin? How are you?
Hey, what's up, fellas? Good show as always. Listen, a couple things. One is I don't think we should be given too many victory parades over the recent win. I think we should have probably had more. And to your comments about down the stretch performance, I mean, we've kind of been seeing this the whole year, guys. So this is not just an anomaly. This is a pattern. I go back to coaching. I've always been told that close games down the stretch come down to coaching in most cases. So anybody that's trying to admonish or trying to, I should say admonish, but trying to give Steve any kind of a leeway, that's not correct. He's responsible for a lot of those close losses. The other thing I would say, Dan, to your point, I think they should be going to more of a broad scope of guys down the stretch. I think this notion that Curry should have the ball at the end of the game is ridiculous. I mean, and it's Curry's job. There's got to be like two guys open typically. I mean, so why? It's probably an easier shot than Curry at the end of the game. So I'm kind of wondering why that hasn't happened. The last thing I wanted to say was I'm looking forward to the continued kind of evolution of the young guys into next year. I don't want to see Klay Thompson on the court beyond what he's doing now. And the other thing, watch out, Dan. You know, Klay was smiling the other night because he got 35, but I'm not sold on the fact that he's bought into coming off the bench just yet. Let's see what happens when he doesn't have a good night and he has to come off the bench. All right, guys, I'll keep listening. Thanks.
That's a good point. It's a really good point. It's all good now when you come off the bench and you have one of your best games on the season, as his high point on the year with 35 points. I think it works in this regard, and I mentioned this last week. The reason why they needed to make the change is because Podziemski makes you younger. He's better defensively, he creates tempo, and he sets the stage right from the jump. And Klay, to me, and I had said this repeatedly going back a month ago, that he had played his way out of a starting lineup and he's now relegated to a role player, which is exactly what he did the other night. Is that the Warriors and any team will tell you that this essentially is the definition of a sixth man. It's going back to the days, this might predate you, to the days of Vinnie Johnson, the microwave they used to call him. Just come off the bench and start shooting the minute you get into the arena. You know, the minute you're in the parking lot, let her rip, Vinny. And that's what the sixth man, by definition, typically is. Somebody comes in and gives you that proverbial shot in the arm. That's Klay Thompson. That's what Klay Thompson, you want to shoot? You want to get into rhythm and shoot? This is going to be your new role. Go ahead and shoot. But here's the thing, Klay, as Austin pointed out, if you're not feeling it and you're not in that zone, well, it makes it a lot easier for me now to go ahead and sit you back down and then bring somebody else in, whether that's GP2, whether that's Saric, or whether that's Chris Paul, because now that you have that depth and he's no longer a starter, it makes it a much easier decision for Steve Kerr if Klay Thompson is not having one of those games that he had the other night when he went for 35 and was shooting from everywhere, every angle, three-point mid-range. If he's not in that sort of zone, then it's a lot easier for me to make the decision, just like any other role player, just like anybody else coming off the bench, that if you don't have it, we'll go somewhere else. But the thing about Klay Thompson, I'll let you go, Ev, is that now having somebody to come in and shoot like that with the second unit is just a win-win for the Warriors when you think about what Podziemski does with the starting lineup.
Well, I think they've been missing scoring from the second unit ever since Jonathan Kuminga demanded and forced his way into the starting rotation. Like, remember, he was not the sixth man because Paul was there, but he was the only guy from the second unit that could either get his own shot or create consistent offense. So once you move him into the starting lineup, and we started to see, like, the Warriors had this string through the midway point of the year where they had outscored opposing bench units like 90% of the time. That quietly has fallen off since Kuminga's gone into the starting unit. And even Podziemski, who I think is really good running the second unit, at least until Paul comes back, he's not a score first type player. So I think it's beneficial for a few reasons. You know, you put scoring in the second unit. I think also you shrink Klay's minutes. Like, he is an aging player. He's got 2 catastrophic injuries. So I think part of it was, hey, this is a back-to-back. We probably don't want to play Klay 3 out of 4 nights, 30-plus minutes anyways. So bringing him off the bench will just logistically make it easier to keep him under 30, which he was at 28. Although I think it was funny that he still got his shots up. He still got 22 looks in 28 minutes, and I think he had like 35 through the first 3 quarters. Didn't score in the fourth, so you might have worn down from that perspective. But I think Austin brings up something interesting to me, too, because to me, it's not necessarily about Klay's performance. What I always worry about is when a veteran or an older player has to accept a role change. It's how do they respond when the team loses, not when they win. Like against Brooklyn, when Guy Santos closed the game instead of Klay. That was the first time I think he hadn't closed since Phoenix before the new year. But they won the game. So there's nothing really to complain about. And you hear Klay Thompson after the postgame. He's saying all the right things, accepting his role change, but they're winning. The question I have is, how does Klay Thompson respond, whether he plays good or bad, but the team loses? Because he's always been accustomed to not just being on the floor in crunch time, but also impacting the outcomes of those games, win or loss. So if he feels like he could have done something different, if he could have helped the team get a win, then I do think we might see a different Klay. But overall, I think if the team continues to succeed, he's fine accepting whatever role that Steve Kerr chooses to give him. Like he mentioned Manu Ginobili. He's mentioned in the past Ray Allen, who's shifted to a sixth-man role and a shooter off the bench. So I think he's open to doing that, and I think he understands that that's probably, number one, the next stage of his career, but also his path to remaining in the league and being relevant and financially compensated. Like, that's the next stage to him to get paid, whether it's by Golden State or another team this offseason. So he sees the needle to be threaded there, but I just wonder how he responds if there's a tight game. For example, they blow a lead, he's not on the floor, and how he feels about what he could have done differently in that situation. I think the loss would be more impactful than him just not playing well.
And let's not forget Andre Iguodala, another guy that was removed and was very, very effective coming off the bench in that sixth-man role. But here's the thing with Klay, and I talked about this last week, that at some point Steve Kerr is going to have that awkward conversation. And I gave you the analogy of a woman breaking up with a guy or a guy breaking up with a woman. And a woman's like, oh, God, I got to have this conversation. I don't want to do it. You keep putting it off. But Steve Kerr, the morning of that Utah game, called him into the office and said, Klay, you are not starting tonight. And I think what made that a lot easier is that I think Steve Kerr was still pissed off from what happened the night before against the Clippers. In that silly, ridiculous, for lack of a better word, stupid foul on the part of Klay Thompson. And very rarely do you see Steve Kerr, especially over the last couple of years, the mature version of Steve Kerr, where he's no longer breaking clipboards, that animated. He was as PO'd as we have seen Steve Kerr in recent memory. And
did you see Podziemski?
Podziemski's well rolling his eyes.
Podziemski was wondering what the hell Klay was doing.
You know, it's interesting you mentioned Podziemski because he's done that a couple of times. Podziemski, I really do believe, whether he's the successor to Steph Curry, I know that's asking a lot and sounds a bit ridiculous. No, I'm just telling you, this guy, there's something special about his play on the court speaks for itself. He connects everybody, but he is wired a little differently. This guy's been in the league. He's been playing in the NBA for about, 3 or 4 months now? Yeah. He's taken on the role of a leader on a team that has, that is loaded with Hall of Famers and quote-unquote leaders at just about every position. He is just, this guy's, I'm just telling you, every now and then a player comes along that's got a twinkle in their eye and you just like, that dude's different. yeah, he's good on the basketball court, but there's a way about him, the way he handles himself, he's in for future stardom and potentially, taking over as quote unquote the leader of the Golden State Warriors. I digress. As we just, we'll just we'll keep things, let's just eat what's on our plate, and that is Klay Thompson now in this reserve role.
Well, number one, I think, and it is significant, like for the first time, now every member of the Big Three, or you also mentioned Iguodala, has sacrificed. And Klay Thompson was the guy when KD came over. They asked him about his role and that changing. And his response is, I'm not sacrificing bleep. Well, for the first time in his career, perhaps, Klay Thompson has sacrificed bleep. That is important. Now, if you have questions about how he'll respond if after a loss, if he doesn't play well, if his minutes are reduced, all that is certainly fair. But I do think it's significant that, number one, he came off the bench. Number two, he performed the way that he did in response to being taken off the bench or taken out of the starting lineup, because he could have pouted. He could have sat there and said, how are you doing this to me? I've started 727 consecutive games in the NBA. I'm a future Hall of Famer. I'm a 4-time champ. You can't do this to me. And instead, he went into Utah, came off the bench. I think he had like 16 in the third quarter, had double digits in the first half. He shot the hell out of the basketball and was a big reason that they pushed the lead to 19. So the response from Klay Thompson, I was impressed with. And I hope that that's something that can continue because, as we discussed, this is a second unit currently devoid of scoring or shot making. And Klay Thompson can, at this point in his career, still provide you with both. I also don't think it's out of the question that he can't close games if he's playing well. But the decision or lack of awareness against the Clippers down the stretch is probably a reason why, you might be thinking about that more often than you did before. So I think Klay Thompson's role change is also a larger significant point about where this core has come from the beginning of the season, being at the top of the hierarchy, now to the point where later in the year, they're a part of the hierarchy because players like Kuminga, players like Podziemski have not just emerged, but they've forced their way into those game-changing moments. They deserve to be on the floor because of how they played one, but more importantly, because they can help the team win and have helped the team win over the last 12 games.
I think Klay Thompson at the end of the day recognizes this, whether he wants to admit it, and I think this is his way of sort of publicly admitting that I'm no longer the same guy. I recognize that I don't have the same sort of quickness and I can't do what it is that I once did. This is his way of acknowledging all of that because he's not the same guy. And I think that he recognizes that it's time for him to go to another role, to come off the bench. And the one thing I hear, Ed, that's sort of bannered about since they made the switch, which was just a couple of days ago, is, and one of the things that Steve Kerr was asked in his postgame was, is this going to be a long-term thing? And I've heard people say that, they don't think that. In fact, I think you might believe that this is just sort of an interim decision on the part of the Golden State Warriors as far as having Klay coming off the bench and Podziemski being a starter. I don't. I think that there's no way Podziemski's only going to get better. And I think he unlocks a lot of, and he connects the Golden State Warriors, and he works well with Steph, and he's only going to continue to mature. I don't see a road back for Klay Thompson cracking or getting back into this starting lineup.
Well, it'd be injury. I mean, if Podziemski has to miss a game or Wiggins has to miss a game, Klay would be next up into the starting lineup.
Which is a good insurance policy.
No, it is. And it's kind of the same. It's interesting because you got two 21 or younger year-olds in the starting lineup right now. When Chris Paul returns, you'll have two first-ballot Hall of Famers coming off the bench.
Yeah.
Now, I don't think that that's something that's as problematic as a lot of people are making it out to be. Like, I think Chris Paul sacrificed the moment he came to Golden State because he knew he was going to be coming off the bench, whether he was, I guess, aggressive with the media or not. I also think now that Klay has seen what Podziemski can do and help this team win, Klay's trying to figure out, okay, how can I do my part? Or I would hope that that's how he's approaching this. But it's interesting that, and I think this does point to the overall maturation of the roster as well as the willingness from the coaching staff to put the veteran guys in their proper places, which is at the beginning of the season, the top five, Curry, Thompson, Wiggins, Draymond, Looney, and then the sixth man was Paul. All of those guys have either been members of championship cores or have been in the league for near 20 years. Now, you look at the top six of the Warriors right now. It is Curry. I'm just going to go by position. Curry, Podziemski, Wiggins, Kuminga, Draymond, and Paul's probably the sixth man. But Looney's not in the picture. Like, there are three members of the core and mainstays at the beginning of the season that are no longer in their spot in the hierarchy that they were at game 1, now to game 51. So that, to me, is an evolution of this team, of this franchise, and I think is indicative of the route that they're going, which even though people want to say they're not embracing the youth movement, I think they've been doing that quite a lot, because otherwise Steve Kerr wouldn't have the guts to bench Klay. He wouldn't have the guts to move Looney virtually out of the rotation. And he wouldn't have the guts, I think, to also, when Chris Paul comes back, say, hey, you're not going to be playing 30-plus minutes a game. You're going to have to fit into what we've found, which is a near 65% winning basketball since Draymond Green returned.
Agreed. I would say that, and I'm the biggest supporter of Steve Kerr, but I do think he didn't come willingly. We saw throughout the season that there were some awkward moments in the Sacramento game where he pulls Moses Moody because he entrusts the guys that he's familiar with, that being the core, including Looney, that it almost got to the point because the season was getting away from him that I think Steve Kerr was forced into making a lot of these decisions. Now, it's a credit to him, yeah, when you look at the composition of this team, as you pointed out, from the beginning of the season to where they're at right now. But I'll give you another example. I think it's time for Trayce Jackson-Davis to get more run. This idea of him being so good and playing the entire second half against Utah and that pick and roll with Steph and the pick and roll with Klay, and he was so effective, and then goes DNP the next night the next game against the Los Angeles Clippers. I think he needs to jump Saric in the rotation. I think that the Golden State Warriors, again, just to reiterate what I've said all along, are an old basketball team. But that doesn't mean you're not a good basketball team. To me, if they were a sitcom or if they were a new show on Netflix or streaming on Hulu, they should be called Steph, Draymond, and the Kids. That's the remedy to them winning. Steph, Draymond, and a bunch of kids. With Podziemski, Kuminga, and the likes of, well, Moses Moody is going to get pushed back further in the rotation. But Trayce Jackson-Davis gives you that athleticism. He gives you something that you don't otherwise have. And I don't see enough of his downplay or enough of where he detracts or takes away from what it is that you're trying to do, and for him not to play an entire game against the Clippers. So the reason why I highlight and I underline Trayce Jackson-Davis is, again, it's Steve Kerr not embracing what could be a young player that is only going to make you better. And I think a lot of the reason why is just simply because of his youth. And it's been sort of this ongoing, scenario that he's had to embrace the entire season. And I'm talking about Coach Steve Kerr. And yes, it's a different look right now, but he was sort of forced. Podziemski played his way into this rotation. Kuminga played his way to force the hand of Steve Kerr. Steve Kerr needs to be, I think, again, I hate criticizing this guy because I sound like a bozo going after a head coach, but just be ahead of the curve. You're in practice with these guys every day. Be innovative. Any coach that's worth a damn sees something that other people don't. You're the one that takes us into the promised land. Like, you insert Trayce Jackson-Davis into a starting lineup, or get not in the starting lineup, but get him into that rotation. Like, do something that other people, be the visionary and not wait until, someone's got your hand twisted behind your back and making you scream, uncle, it's time to play the kids. I guess is still sort of my bark when I think about Steve Kerr and the youth movement that are the Golden State Warriors.
Yeah, look, I'm not going to sit up here and say this has been Steve Kerr's best season as a coach. He's made some decisions that have directly resulted in losses. I think he probably could have moved the young guys along further. But at the same time, Dan, okay, so take Podziemski, for example. He's playing 33 minutes a game this month. Are you supposed to just start him and play him 33 minutes at the beginning of his career? Like, you have to progress. You have to. I think the fact that Podziemski is playing an All-Star weekend, he's not an All-Star, but he's playing an All-Star weekend, it looks like he's someone that can be a standard bearer in Golden State. He's a culture fit. You obviously hit on him. He might be the third best player right now from his rookie class, and he's helping you win games. And you still got 2 months left in the season. Like, I would look at that and say he's developed very quickly. Not it's taken too long for him to develop. Kuminga's a little bit different, but I also think you look at him and say he's 21. He's now been averaging 20 points the last 15 games. He's had a sustained amount of success playing with the big boys, with complimenting Wiggins, Draymond, Curry, as well as who's ever at the two. Like, I would look at that and say, okay, well, he's here. Like, yes, you would have liked him to be along further earlier in his career. He might have been able to help last season. I don't know. Or at least in the playoffs. I'm not sure about that. That's debatable in my opinion. But like, I look at the young guys, and I guess the fact that they're playing well, Trayce Jackson-Davis is interesting. I think that TJD doesn't get more run because of a philosophical approach by the Warriors. Like, it's not about TJD. It's about that they don't play with a traditional center. Like, Draymond plays the five. If you look at the amount of minutes that the other fives get, you'll see Looney got, I think, 10 minutes against Utah. Saric, who got 10 minutes against Utah. Maybe that's too many. I don't think Saric has been playing very well lately. TJD got 8 minutes. Like, that's more of an indication of me them not using a true center than not wanting to use Trayce Jackson-Davis. Now, I think when Chris Paul comes back, because he likes to play a little bit slower, more half-court sets, pick and roll, there could be a spot for TJD, along with, I think, also Klay Thompson. That second unit might be one that slows the game down and shrinks things as opposed to playing up-tempo, because you've moved all of your up-tempo younger guys into the starting lineup. So I'm interested to see how the second unit looks with Chris Paul, and I think there could be a larger role for TJD, but I don't think all of a sudden he's going to go from playing 8 minutes a game, which has been impactful, to all of a sudden now playing 20 minutes, because Draymond's going to be at the 5 for 30 of them, and that leaves 18 to be distributed between three guys, and he's one of the three.
Well said. I do think, though, when it comes to Trayce Jackson-Davis, is that you're always going to be a vertically challenged team. And that's fine, because the Warriors like to go small. But when you do go, there are opportunities, especially in that game against the Clippers, in the game against Utah, or late in the game, they got multiple possessions simply because you had no one who could match a Walker Kessler and or a Markkanen. Sometimes the Warriors are always going to be that team. This has been going on, I don't know how many years, where you're in quest of somebody who's bigger than 6'8" on the floor. And I think Trayce Jackson-Davis gives you that opportunity in whatever role. If you're youthful and talented, find a spot for him. As far as Podziemski, you're spot on. Well said, Ev. I would just say this, again, when it gets back to being a coach, if you're going to be that different coach, that guy that sees something that nobody else does, he was privy to Podziemski before any of us. Mm-hmm. Like, he saw him at practice. And you could see that this kid had a swagger about him from day one. So, yes, Podziemski incrementally, slowly, he wasn't going to get 30 minutes of run from day one, but he was relegated to DNP and not playing in the beginning of the season. The only reason he got an opportunity was because out of need, because out of injury, when they were decimated in that game against Minnesota where he went off. And Steve Kerr saw what it is that this kid could do on a basket for the Golden State Warriors, because he had access to him before any of us, and still didn't play him. Just essentially said, you're a rookie, you sit on the end of the bench, and you're not playing, even though I've seen you do some special things in practice, and or I've seen the way you handle yourself for a guy who's only 20 years of age at the time. You're much more mature and beyond your years, but it took a team decimated by injury and a team that needed, Podziemski to come into a game for them to sort of recognize, he can play at that level. I guess what I'm saying is that if you're going to be a different coach, sometimes you just got to be ahead of the curve, and Podziemski's a perfect example. But I understand what it is you're saying, and I think we're both sort of saying the same thing. Maybe, I think maybe that round goes to you, actually, when it comes to playing some of the youngsters.
No, well, of course, the round of the week goes to you, because you've been talking about Podziemski needing to be in the starting lineup for quite some time now. And I got some further thoughts on Podziemski on the other side, something you touched on earlier, which I want to get back to, about being a standard bearer.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's talk a little Podziemski. We continue. The phone lines are now officially open at 888-957-9570. Lines 2, 3, and 4. Hit us up. It's Evan Giddings and Dan Devone. It's Warriors This Week. Back with more after this.
I'm what you might call very good at hide and seek. This one time, my parents had to run.
Now back to Warriors This Week on 95.7 The Game.
Welcome to the All-Star break as the Golden State Warriors hit the break at one game over the 500 mark, 27-26. Up next, a date with the Los Angeles Lakers. They'll do that coming up on Thursday, but it's an opportunity for everybody to get away. And I think you saw that sort of in that last game against Utah, because typically on a back-to-back like that, right, if this had been a month ago or if you didn't have the All-Star game, there wasn't that sense of urgency of let's play Steph for as many minutes as he did. Let's get Clay into this basketball game, albeit off the bench, but having him play extended minutes because they wanted that one. That was basically one of those, do you have one of those buddies that are like, let's go out for a beer tonight? And you're like, dude, I've been out for the last 3 nights. And he goes, sleep when you're dead. Sleep when you're dead, bro. That's sort of the Golden State Warriors. Just sleep during the All-Star break. But we need to.
You think you're going to have 2 drinks, you end up having 12. You have a hell of a night, and then you wake up regretting it all. But, of course, they got a week off, so I think that's obviously something that's good. They scored 140 points and almost lost.
Yeah, well, that's the NBA also this year.
True.
Which is sort of crazy. Speaking of which, really quick, have you fully recovered from Las Vegas? And are there any other stories that are still lingering about?
I think I told you the couple that are going to remain under wraps during the commercial break. But no, I mean, it was a few long nights. I feel like if you're getting in before the sunrise in Las Vegas, you're probably doing okay. Or even by the... but that's the other part too, is you don't know what time it is when you're in those casinos and you're rolling. So, no, I've fully recovered from Las Vegas, and now I'm just starting to get back into, I guess, probably the Super Bowl hangover was it for a lot of people, just the game itself, and then now we're transitioning into full Warriors season. It's interesting too. I wonder how many people, because of the NFL, and there's a lot of really passionate Bay Area sports fans. We here on this station have people that pay attention to the Warriors the whole year, of course. But I wonder how many people, the All-Star break is really where the season begins, because you finally know where you're kind of at or where your record is. But then the Super Bowl is officially done, or at least for the 49ers in this case, because of their deep run, everyone had their eyes on the Niners. So it's like everyone's just now getting back into the Warriors. And that's kind of how I felt this week coming off of Las Vegas.
Yeah, I think it's true for baseball as well. At the beginning of the year, it's pretty much the diehards that are watching the box scores, that are following baseball. And then as far as everybody else, and sort of the people that are straddling the fence when it comes to being that guy when it comes to covering or following baseball, it's usually post All-Star break or once the season begins to sort of come into focus as far as divisional races and the postseason, then people jump on board. But speaking of the Super Bowl, I wanted to go here for a second, and then I want to hear your thoughts on Podziemski. But when you think about the Super Bowl of the NBA, that obviously being the NBA Finals, I hear this statement is always qualified. Like, the Warriors are much better. They're in a better place. They're playing good basketball right now, but they're not a championship team. Let's just be realistic. They're not an NBA championship. This isn't going to the finals. All I would say to that, and I don't look at this through fandom glasses, all right? Because I'm not a fan. I'm just giving you this about as objectively as anybody here at 95.7 The Game, probably more so than anyone that works at this station. But I would say this when it comes to the Warriors and winning a title this year, why the hell not? Why the hell not? If again, we're talking about the best teams in the NBA, that being, the T-Wolves, the Thunder, or even Boston, I have yet to see any of those teams, when the Warriors play them, where you can look at them on the same floor going, wow. Minnesota, yeah, Warriors, you're a couple of years away from challenging this team. Boston Celtics, yeah, they've got players that the Warriors just simply can't match up with. Now, listen, over a 7-game series, is Boston going to be favored? Are the Thunder going to be favored? Maybe. But I certainly give the Warriors a puncher's chance, and maybe more so. And especially going forward with the addition of Chris Paul, with Jonathan Kuminga growing up, and same with Podziemski in front of our very eyes. The emergence of some of these young players, GP2 now. And I think GP2 is a guy we don't talk enough about because he has a lot to do with, it's not coincidental that they're playing so much better defensively, obviously with the return of Draymond, but let's not overlook GP2. But I guess my point being in all of this, the Golden State Warriors, if they continue to play well, there's no reason why they can't come out of the West this year. And if you're coming out of the West, then hell yeah, you can win the NBA title. I know I'm biting off a lot there, but it's just, I don't think it's beyond the realm of comprehension that the Golden State Warriors could find themselves back in an NBA Finals if they continue ascending in the same direction.
Yeah, I don't look at them as contenders yet, but I will say of the teams that are in the play-in, they're probably the most dangerous. I know that the Lakers just made the Western Conference Finals last year, but I think they're a very different basketball team, and quietly, they haven't been a great team with LeBron James this season. So the one difference is, I guess, I think Curry has been more impactful in terms of winning than LeBron has, even though people would throw the double overtime loss in my face. I think the Warriors are a team that of the play-in four right now, Dallas, Sacramento, and LA, and Golden State, they'd be the team that you want to face the least because they're also starting to figure it out. I think people are always kind of wondering what they were going to do and how they were going to operate at the trade deadline, but now that they've started to figure some things out, I do think they become a very dangerous team. The one area I would be hesitant to say why not them would be the record against the West. Of every team that is currently in playoff contention of the top 10 teams, they're the only team with a sub 500 record against the West. So they have not yet, over the course of the season, shown themselves to be able to beat the best consistently. And of course, you have to do it 4 times in 7 games. So that's where I would say, I know Minnesota is going to be favored and OKC is going to be favored. I think they would be favored for a reason because the Warriors as a whole have not been as good against the teams that they would have to go through to get to the finals compared to the teams that, like, actually they're in the Eastern Conference. I'd actually feel a lot better about them. And then I think if we're just looking at, teams in the West that scare me, really the only one is Denver. I know that they're in 4th place right now, but this is kind of what they did last year. Like, they kind of, I think, put it in cruise control the last few weeks heading into the playoffs and then turned it on. I just don't think that there's a starting 5 better than them in the West. So that would be the one team that I would hope to avoid if you're Golden State, but that probably means you have to win a playoff series to get there.
They don't scare me as much as a year ago when I thought they were clearly better than anyone else in the NBA. But if you just, again, look at the games the Warriors have played against all those teams this year, including the Denver Nuggets, every single one of those have gone right down to the nub. Mm-hmm. Every one of those things have been decided on the last possessions of the game. I mean, the Warriors are right there with these teams. And it's funny, because when you talk about the playing game and the Warriors wanting to sort of avoid that, right? Like, you'd rather be in that 6-7 playing game as opposed to that of the, the 7-8 playing, as opposed to the 9-10. But if you're coming out of you're coming out of the playing game, you're taking on either the 1 or the 2 seed, basically.
Yeah.
And if you get that 6 seed, which is you're avoiding the play-in tournament altogether,
mm-hmm.
but that almost assures you a date with the Denver Nuggets in the first round or the Los Angeles Clippers.
Yeah.
I think you might be better off taking on the likes of, should it shake out, Minnesota or OKC are number 1 or 2, respectively. Because while they're good, now we're getting into the postseason, and it's like, hey, man, we've been here. We've done that. Have you? And they haven't.
No, I'm with you. And I think the team, it might sound weird because they've beaten the Warriors a few times this year, but the team that I would want to face right now would be the Thunder. I would want to face the Oklahoma City Thunder because they have a very young team with not much playoff experience. I know that Minnesota is also considered young, but let's not forget, the only reason that they got bounced in the first round last year was because they played the eventual champs. And of all the 4 rounds that the Nuggets played in the playoffs, the Timberwolves gave them their best series. Like, that's not a team that I actually would want to see in the postseason because they have all the ingredients as well as quietly some playoff experience, even if you don't believe that Rudy Gobert is the same player in the regular or the postseason. But I think that Minnesota is a team that is a tougher matchup for the Warriors than the Thunder would be. And I guess, like, I think Oklahoma City is the team that I have my eyes on the most as far as how far they can go, because the playoffs are just a different demon. It's a completely different season, and I just wonder if Oklahoma City's offensively driven team is going to be able to hold up when you're pretty much, the game bogs down, you're playing half court, you got to get stops consistently, and you're also playing against the best of the best. So if I'm the Warriors, and again, this is why I'm just kind of was doing some math here, Dan. Over the final 29 games, I think to me the goal should be to get to the 7 seed. Now, I think your ceiling is the 6. I don't think there's any way you're catching the 5 because that means that the Pelicans or the Suns will have separated themselves. Right now, you're 5 games behind the 6th seed with 29 games to go. That may not sound very intimidating, but if the Warriors play the same level of basketball that they have since Draymond Green returned, that would put you at about 19-10, which is a good record. I don't know if a 9-game above 500 record the rest of the way is good enough to jump 5 games or 6 games, essentially, because you're probably not going to have the tiebreaker. So I think realistically for the Warriors, they're aiming at the 7-8, and I hope it's going to be the 7 so that they can win the first home game, secure that, ideally play Oklahoma City, and then see what happens. But obviously that demands that they keep their level of basketball the same. And also, this is something, too. If they win 19 games of their next 29, that would put them at 46 wins. That's 2 more than a year ago. So I don't know if we would be talking about, that kind of number at the trade deadline or before the trade deadline. But if you go 19-10 the last 29 games and you play a pretty soft schedule, I think that bodes well for the Warriors picking themselves into that 7-8 spot.
Yeah, it's not only the number of games. 5 is not unsurmountable. You can do that.
Well, it also means the teams ahead of you have to fall off.
There's a lot of teams in front of you.
Yeah.
And that's really what you have to concern yourself with. And a lot of teams that are also playing very well. I mean, the Dallas Mavericks now, winners of 6 in a row. They've won 7 of their last 10. The Sacramento Kings have fallen off a bit of late, but the New Orleans Pelicans are playing very well. But again, when I look at the Western Conference and just the landscape, the Golden State Warriors, if you watch that game against the Clippers, now I know they were without Kawhi Leonard, but Kawhi Leonard plays sparingly. Now, I know he's a big part of what they do, but Kawhi Leonard being out of a basketball game is not breaking news. But I just do the eye test, and I'm like, the Clippers they're good, tremendous talent, but that's not a team that you look at and say, man, you're clearly head and shoulders better than us. I think the youth movement on this, and something we continue to talk about, it really beginning to rear its head. And this is what I think is so special about the Golden State Warriors, is because the best thing about youth is that they only get older with every game and more experience and that much better. And again, unlike any of the other teams that we have talked about, you can't really handicap the Golden State Warriors because you have no idea where the hell they're going to be in a month or two. They're only getting better. And all these moving pieces, but they're just solidified their starting lineup, and we're at the All-Star break. So the idea that, you can't play with Minnesota or a 7-game series against the Clippers or the Nuggets, you can't do that. I mean, how do you know? Because this team that started the season sure as hell doesn't look like the team that's going into the All-Star break, and the team going into the All-Star break is not going to be the same team that heads to the postseason in terms of their level of play. I think the outlook is very rosy for the Golden State Warriors. But I do want to get back to your thoughts on Podziemski and what it is you had in mind of the young man out of Santa Clara.
Well, first of all, I will say that the Clippers are a team I would not want to play in the postseason if they're healthy. That's the biggest question for them. It always has been, especially because
really, you did, like James Harden. Are you? No,
I'm afraid of playoff Kawhi.
Okay,
like I'm afraid
Kawhi's legit.
Kawhi Leonard is one of the best postseason performers in the history of basketball.
No,
when he's healthy.
And the Warriors saw that firsthand a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And Paul George is also very good in the postseason, because when Kawhi was out a couple of years back, it was Paul George that almost took them to the NBA Finals. So yeah, point well taken. But again.
But they've also blown 22-point leads, 15-point leads. Like, those are games that you probably should have won. And one of those was on the road and did include Kawhi Leonard, to your point.
So, yeah, it'll be – I just don't – again, there's nobody that really should scare Golden State Warriors fans, because the Clippers could say the same thing about the Golden State Warriors. Like, do you really want to play Steph Curry and Draymond Green in the postseason? Even Kevon Looney and Andrew Wiggins are all battle-tested, and Andrew Wiggins has played his best basketball in the postseason. He has not been the same guy since the NBA Finals of 2 years ago. But go ahead.
No, I mean, back to Podziemski, I think we're starting to see a player that, like, I don't know if he's going to be a perennial all-star. I know that's a projection that people have for him. Maybe not perennial, but certainly someone that can make an all-star game in the near future. He looks like someone that is going to be a mainstay in the starting lineup for years to come. And it's because of what he brings outside of just scoring. He is, in many ways, more than any rookie or young player, quite honestly, in the last, I would say, 5 years that the Warriors have drafted, which includes Jordan Poole, includes Jonathan Kuminga. In the immediate, he is the epitome of a Golden State Warrior. He plays heady basketball. He does the little things. He leads the NBA in charges. He is someone that, since has been given rope by Steve Kerr, has contributed to winning basketball in a way that we have not seen a rookie do so. Now, he's been given the opportunity, but to your point, Dan, he's also forced his way into that role. He's demanded to be played. And from that perspective, I feel like Podziemski is somebody that we've quietly seen breadcrumbs trickled out from the veterans as someone that can be a torchbearer for this dynasty or the end of this dynasty. Into whatever the Golden State Warriors become after Steph Curry, Podziemski is someone that I don't know if he's going to be the number one for a championship team, but he represents the culture, I think, more than anyone that I've seen in recent memory. And to have captured that so quickly is extremely rare, and it's why we've seen his minutes each and every month ramp up. Started with 20 minutes, then 29 minutes in December, 30 minutes in January, 33 minutes here in February, and now he's into the starting lineup, and it looks like he's got a chance to stay there. This is a guy that the veterans trust, that he has earned their trust because he plays well with Steph. He knows how to move the ball, similar to Draymond, and he does the little things that contribute to winning basketball. That's not to say he can't get better. I think defensively he can. His jump shot needs some work, although he's been making strides in that department since he quote-unquote hit a rookie wall, which Steve Kerr said last month. He's been much better. But Podziemski is a guy that I can envision being on the Warriors 5 years from now and being a focal point for their success. That is something that's not easy to find, and especially for a mid-round, first-round pick, they absolutely hit that nail on the head. And I just feel like this is a guy that many of the veterans are kind of indicating is someone that can be a torchbearer, can take the torch from them and run with it in the future. Again, not to say he's going to be a guy that's going to score 20 a game, get 10 assists, and be an absolute dominant number one, but the sky is the limit for him from what we've already seen in his rookie season. That's kind of the indication that I'm getting from not just watching him play, but from how the veterans, the core championship players, are talking about him.
The big test for me is just when I watch a Warrior game and the ball's in his hands, I have this sense of security comes over me that he's going to do the right thing.
Yeah.
He's going to make the right basketball play. He's going to get it to the right guy. Or if the opportunity presents itself, he's going to get to the basket and he's going to score that more often because he finishes very well. The ball's in his hands. I feel good. I feel as though something good is going to come out of this. Not necessarily a basket or an assist, but it's just going to be the right basketball play. And you don't have that with a lot of players throughout the NBA, especially in their first year. And he's a special player, but you know what some people will tell you? And I hear a lot of this is that, well, just easy, Dan, just check yourself because just remember a couple of years ago, who were we saying this about? Jordan Poole. Like, just remember, like, let this breathe a little bit. Let this just relax because we had the same sort of thoughts concerning one Jordan Poole back in the day. Which you would say what? I know what I would say, but go ahead, Ev.
So to me, the biggest difference between Poole and Podziemski, like, it's kind of funny. Do you think Jordan Poole is a more talented player than Podziemski is?
Talent in terms of shooting the basketball and raw athleticism, yes.
I agree. I think he is a more talented player than Podziemski. Podziemski is certainly further along in his rookie year than Poole was because he was a late pick and was kind of back and forth between the G League. And I guess it's kind of because of how Poole's tenure ended. Podziemski, he's just more of a culture fit. Now, a lot of that isn't Poole's fault. You know, we don't have to rehash the punch. I think that had a big deal to do with it. But clearly, by the end of his time in Golden State, Jordan Poole was not a right fit. Or the Warriors weren't a right fit for Jordan Poole. So the Warriors made their choice. And I think that coming in, Podziemski is the right fit. Like, he might not be the best player from his class, but he's probably the third most important player behind the two guys at the top being Wembanyama and Holmgren I guess you could throw Jaquez in there for Miami. But as far as importance in their rookie season of their respective teams, Podziemski's third or fourth in his class. That doesn't mean he's the most talented, but that's the kind of impact that he has. So the reason why I would separate him from Jordan Poole is the fit. And that has to do with him as an individual, but also the way that the Warriors play and have been able to integrate him.
Brandon Miller's also a guy who's going off this year.
Yeah, he's very good.
Yeah, so I would say this, that it's not only a fit with the Golden State Warriors, I think it's a fit with any other team. I think that he's a better basketball player than Jordan Poole at the end of the day. If you were to ask me, is this another Jordan Poole? Well, no. And if you wanted to push me, well, why isn't this, another Jordan Poole, just flash, and then 2 years later, Podziemski's going to be sort of an irrelevant player that they're going to try and push out of town? It's because of everything that you just laid out. It's very rare that you see a guy that, and keep in mind, Jordan Poole was disinterested in playing defense, all right? There is a whole other side of basketball. It's not football where you have, another 11 dudes who come into the game and are specialized to play one side of the ball defensively or offensively. The fact that you could score basketball is only half of the equation. What good is a three if you're giving up another three on the other end? Podziemski is so further along in terms of defense, taking charges, and his overall presence, as I mentioned, connecting guys, working with Steph. He's just a better basketball player. And the things that we alluded to, as far as being the torchbearer and bridging this potential dynasty, is that he is a leader. And this is a guy that all of those quote-unquote intangibles are the boxes that he's checking. And while Jordan Poole could score the basketball, that was the extent of his contribution to the Golden State Warriors. And why it goes beyond just being a culture fit, because it's the same thing that's plaguing him with another team and another culture in Washington, which we saw early on in the season, him getting into blow-ups with the coaches, with that of his other players. And he's just a guy, like a lot of dudes in the Washington Wizards and like a lot of dudes in the NBA, that can score the basketball. Those guys are all over the NBA. They're short-lived and very rarely, although Jordan Poole does have a title, but it'll be hard-pressed to ever win another one. I'm willing, and I feel very safe saying that. But Brandon Podziemski is cut out of a different cloth entirely when you're comparing the two. But it's fair because we do have a tendency to overreact, rush to judgment. We'll let this breathe a little with Podziemski. I would just say this. I feel a lot more secure that Podziemski is sort of the long-term solution as opposed to that of Jordan Poole.
Yeah, and I think, and we can get into this on the other side, the long-term solutions that we've seen on this team are ones that, and it's prisoner of the moment, I understand, but you can envision them having staying power as opposed to maybe some of the short-term solutions which Poole was grouped into last year.
All right. The Comcast business text line. Moody is getting the shaft again in all this.
Yep.
Was Moody shopped around at the deadline, and so how is he being benched? Well, let's talk a little Moody. We'll get into the Golden State Warriors going forward, the second half of the schedule, and how that plays in favor of the Warriors. But Moses Moody, he's beloved by all. We'll explain why he's not getting run and why you're going to see less and less of him going forward. Evan Giddings, Dan Avone, Warriors This Week, back after this.
Hey, any big plans for today?
Yep, checking out Target's 4-day sale.
Oh, for what?
For scoring 20% off.
For 20%.
Now back to Warriors This Week on 95.7 The Game.
Welcome back to Warriors This Week. It's Evan Giddings and Dan Avon. I was just talking to you about this. Like, where the hell is everybody? Is everybody still Super Bowl hungover here? Usually when we're talking about the Warriors, especially coming off of a positive week, there's a lot more interaction. Or maybe this is one of those audiences that you just, you love to sort of commiserate in the misery that of the Golden State Warriors. And when things are going poorly is when we hear from people. People like to pile on. Is that what's going on here?
No, I think people are pretty excited. I also think the All-Star break is an interesting time because I kind of looked at this weekend as a sigh of relief, not because the Warriors got there and they're a game above 500, but because, all right, we finally get a break from what has felt like, I don't know, just an anxiety-ridden season. You finally get a week off, all right, especially the way you finished. Like, they blew a lead to the Clippers. They probably should have lost to Utah, but they didn't. So they went 3-1 to finish this week. And now it's like, all right, let's just take a breath of fresh air, kick back, and let's listen to Dan and Evan instead of jumping on the backs of, I don't know, Klay Thompson or Steve Kerr. And everything has mellowed out, Dan. So I think people are listening. Maybe they're just not as fired up to chime in.
All right, I don't like mellow, man. Get fired up. 888-957-9570. That's 888-957-9570. We want to hear from you. 510, I know you're always with me. Let Jimmy Jacket, there he goes. The streak continues now. Yes, thank you very much. We're talking about Moses Moody, and we know you Moses Moody fans are certainly out there.
Yeah.
And there's a definite connective tissue between Moses Moody and the fan base here in the Bay Area. They like this guy, and I understand it. A lot of it is just simply he seems like a really chill cat. Never talked to him personally, but he just seems like a likable force. He keeps his nose clean. Unlike that of Jonathan Kuminga, he's not complaining about getting run when certainly a guy that young, you would think it's only logical. It seems as though his fans are doing a lot of the complaining for him, but you don't hear peep out of Moses Moody. And I think that's, that image, I think, resonates with a lot of people. People just at the end of the day like nice guys, like nice people. And I think he's one of those. And on top of that, he's a good player. He can shoot it. He's one of those guys he's young. He's got that athletic build. He helps your team. But again, I think this gets down to just simply the position he plays. And I think you have to look at it from this vantage point when you're Steve Kerr. It's nothing personal. It's just, who am I taking minutes away from to play Moses Moody?
Yeah, I think the guy that everyone has wondered about taking Moody's minutes most would probably be Quinones. But I just think they both probably shoot the three about the same. Like, Quinones was a slightly better three-point shooter in college. He was shot it a little bit better in the G League than Moody. But I think that the Warriors just like his quickness. I think he can stay in front of people a little easier than Moses. Moses is longer. But again, I also think that Quinones' minutes are going to be gone the moment that Chris Paul comes back. We're not going to see him.
Yeah, I think Quinones is more of a Chris Paul sort of a fill-in as opposed to Moses Moody.
Yeah, I agree. I think Moses is probably more of a three. He's more of a wing. I think you're right, Dan. He's just the odd man out, and it's not going to get any easier to crack the rotation when Chris Paul comes back and is taking 25 minutes away from other people. I also think someone like Gary Payton II coming back has influenced how Steve Kerr sees that position with Moody that's a little muddled right now.
And Klay Thompson.
Now
coming off the bench.
And no one would complain about Gary Payton II getting 15 minutes ahead of Moses Moody. He's been an energizer bunny. He's so fun to watch, and you just hope that he could stay healthy. So, yeah, I think Moses Moody is just by process of elimination, he's not in the rotation. And I also don't think that, I know he's playing well before he got hurt, which sucks because he was maybe playing his best basketball before going down with the calf strain. But I also don't think he's a guy that you look at and say he's the difference between a 15-point loss against the Clippers and not. He just isn't there yet.
888-957-9570, Oakland, California. Let's say hello to Seth, who joins the big program. What's up, Seth?
Hey, how you guys doing?
Well,
I was watching that Utah game, expecting them to lose, relieved that they didn't, and thinking it looks like they're 7-10 in games where they score 130 or more. Given that they're a good rebounding team and getting old and they seem to run out of gas, what do you guys think about slowing the game down and running a real half-court offense and just getting more open looks instead of trying to run in transition.
I like it, but I would say that that's not who they are when they're playing at their optimal level as far as a basketball team. And I also think that I've always maintained that they're an old basketball team, and it's not coincidental that they're now beginning to run more than ever with Draymond Green back, who starts it with defense, but with Podziemski, who's all about energy and tempo, and Jonathan Kuminga. And this is another reason why I want to see Trayce Jackson-Davis more, is because he's another one. These guys sprint and beat everybody up the floor. It's about filling lanes, and you've got to be young and have young legs in order to do that. But I think that I hear what it is that you're saying, and it certainly makes a lot of sense. But I think that the Golden State Warriors, over the long run, are more suited playing that sort of tempo of basketball. You know, early on when they were struggling, Seth, is that this was a team that was amongst the league's lowest statistically supported in terms of transitional basketball. I think part of that was because Chris Paul was getting a lot more run. Mm-hmm. If they're going to be successful, it has to be what we've seen of late, and that is this sort of managed chaos where they're going up and down, they're beating the other opposing team to their spots, they're walking into threes, they're getting layups, they're getting out and running, and it's going to produce high numbers. But the Warriors will take that more so than if you were to get into more of a half-court set or take the air out of the ball, as they like to say, and play at a slower tempo. The Warriors are not necessarily suited to play that way and be successful.
Well, the issue is eventually, inevitably, the game does become a half-court game. When you're playing tight matchups, you're going shot for shot. You're taking the ball out underneath the basket. You are going to have to get looks. You're going to have to score points in the half-court. You're going to have to get half-court stops. And that's why I thought that the Warriors defensively, before the Clippers and Utah, I asked Kerr about this before the game, just what he thought essentially had led to their uptick in defense outside of just Draymond Green being back. And he said that they were, over the last 10 games, so now over the last 12, I think they're probably still in the top 5, but they're a top 5 half-court defense. So they're able to generate stops in the half-court when the game gets slower, and that allows them to get out and transition and run. Well, if another team is making shots, that forces you to be efficient in your half-court offense. And I think that someone like Chris Paul actually does help that, because even though the game slows down, I think he can play with a little more pace, and he'll be forced to. But I think in those fourth quarters, like the last 6 minutes of a game, clutch time, so to speak, Chris Paul is someone that makes sure that you get the best shot. Now, I think he gives up something a little bit defensively because he's older and smaller, and you're probably playing Curry and Chris together, which means you have a small backcourt. If you're playing Podziemski, and I'd like him to be out there as well, that means you're really small. But I think with Chris Paul in the game, you're probably going to get an efficient possession. So I think him coming back would help that. But again, it's one of my questions is when the game gets tight, because inevitably it's going to, whether it's in the regular season or the postseason, you're going to have to execute down the stretch of a game. And that's kind of been their bugaboo this year. So how can they change that? How can they operate a bit better? I do wonder. I think it involves, and we talked about this off the top of the show, I think it involves their wings. I think Kuminga and Wiggins have to be more assertive down the stretch of games, because it can't just be Curry pounding the rock or Chris Paul pounding the rock, waiting for Steph to come off a screen, waiting for Podziemski to set a pick and back, or even Klay Thompson if he's in the game. They can't rely, I think, as much on the Splash Brothers to generate consistent offense over 8 minutes of the fourth quarter as they used to.
Well, I think that comes down from Steve Kerr. Steve Kerr's got to say, hey, listen, we're not just going ISO here. Let's go side to side and keep the ball moving. All right. I know it's getting a little too close for our comfort here, but let's continue to play our style of play. This cannot just be a DHO with Draymond Green and Steph Curry, that two-man game and just Steph being one-dimensional. I think a lot of that is by design. And so as far as Kuminga and as far as Wiggins, I feel as though they're sort of the odd man looking out here. They're sort of not necessarily in the scheme or the design or the template of how the Warriors want to play towards the end of games. So as a matter of results, it's sort of awkward for them knowing that they don't necessarily have that green light at the end of games, much like that as Steph Curry. I think if they were incorporated more just from a philosophical and design standpoint, they'd play much better. All right, phones are backed up now at 888-957-9570. Newark is where we're going. Kevin joins us. Kevin, kick us off. What's up, buddy?
Not much. Hey, I just you were asking why people weren't calling in. I'll tell you, I had a lot. I'd watch every game. I watch every game over. My family does this. We go to the games, so I'm really into it. I listen to a lot of the podcasts and whatnot about it. Played the game and whatnot. And I'll tell you, really disappointed at the beginning of the season. Seemed like really selfish ball. And then when Kerr finally started playing some of the young people, Kuminga, Keonis, G. Santos, and whatnot, our game really started picking up. We were fast. We were really on top of the ball. We were so slow. We were so unathletic prior to that. Basically a 500 team because that's where Curry could hold us. And I'm not knocking Curry on this. I just the rest of the team, I mean, Draymond's been playing super too as he's come back. But as he kind of like the last game and a quarter or so, he's reverted back to what really put us at 500. It didn't dig us out of the hole. It made us old again. You're running these players that are old in the first place too long. I know they're only in their 30s, but by basketball standards, they're old. And they'd be more effective if they had less minutes. If we use some of our young players, Kuminga had 7 minutes in the first half. And I'm kind of surprised that no one ever mentions on anything I listened to or watched. There was a point where Kuminga, in the second half of this last game, scored a bucket or two. I can go back and look at it. I didn't really want to watch that game because I really thought it was ugly like the beginning of the season. But there's a point where both Draymond and Pods goes up and like pats him on the back like it's going to be okay. And it just baffles me that Kerr sits him as much as he does. When I coach basketball, I love coaches like that because they would sit some guy that honestly would hurt us. And so I just want to kind of hear what you guys have to think about that.
Well, it sort of gets back to, just to support what it is that you're saying there, Kevin, is that I don't think, and I'm the last guy in the room that wants to criticize not only Steve Kerr, but any coach. Anybody that does that consistently, just as a side note in sports talk radio, is a bozo. All right, there's a reason why you're talking to the guy who's actually coaching. Because Steve Kerr, and any coach at any level that's poring over film, that's watching this stuff and intimately knows this stuff 50x than I do. All right, so I just have to throw that out there as a precursor. But my one criticism, just as a fan sitting on his fat ass like everybody else watching this stuff, is that, Steve Kerr does not have a lot of security with the younger players and has a quick hook for someone like that of a Jonathan Kuminga and a Trayce Jackson-Davis. And it's because they're young players, and he does have a sense of security going with that foundational core, which is old. And just to oversimplify it, old doesn't work in any sport. And I don't care what the resume says, is that in order to be relevant, you've got to be young and good. They're good with Steph and Draymond, but you've got to balance that with youth. We have got to see a youthful presence, and that's the reason, as much as anything else, as to why the Golden State Warriors have been resurrected over the last couple of weeks. And I just think that Steve Kerr still comes along at times unwillingly. It's sort of like pulling teeth with this guy.
Yeah, I think he's coached a little reactionary. I mean, when something hasn't worked, like Klay being bad in the fourth quarter, well, then you have to. I guess I don't know.
You don't have to comment on it. I feel bad. It's almost like I threw you I threw you a pass where there's nowhere to go, man. It's just like a medicine ball over the middle with two defenders.
Oh gosh, yeah, I'm like Debo in the Super Bowl, just right off the hands. I think. Look, Kerr I think he's in a tough spot. That's not to excuse his decisions. Like, he's certainly had games in which he's not coached well this year, in my opinion. I also think that, look, if you wanted to lean all the way in on the young guys, well, then you probably should have moved an older guy either before the season or at the trade deadline. But you didn't. You knew that you were going to get older by getting people back from injury, right? Because Chris Paul's coming back. Gary Payton II, he's He's older by basketball years because he seems to be unable to stay on the floor. Those players are coming back into the fold. So we knew that this was going to be something that was an issue. I also think in regards to, like, I didn't think Kuminga played particularly well against Utah. And down the stretch of games, and this is probably the next step for him, as well as Podziemski. I don't think Podziemski's off the hook on this also. Like, those are young guys in big moments. They're going to have a learning curve, more so than obviously Klay or Steph. I think that's what's made particularly Klay Thompson so difficult to watch down the stretch of games, like against the Clippers. It's like, how do you commit a foul in the backcourt down 3 when you don't have to? You're in your 12th year in the NBA. You should know those things. As opposed to Podziemski or Kuminga that are having to play through new situations to them. But if you're Kerr, when you're a game above 500, you're playing better. I don't know. I just think, like, again, the margin of error for this Warriors team is so small that if a coaching decision is correct 7 times out of 10, that's a good percentage. But those 3 mistakes really, really hurt you. In fact, they might lose you a basketball game. So I just think that's an indication of, yes, Kerr not having the greatest pulse on each situation, but also an indication of this roster not being as talented as maybe we thought it was. And that's why they're trying to figure out how to extract the best out of it as opposed to making moves at the deadline. So, yeah, I mean, I don't mean to kind of take the baton and then just give it right back to you, but I'm curious what the people think about the way that either Kerr looked in the last couple of games or that the Warriors have looked down the stretch against both the Clippers and Utah, whether they think that's something that's going to return soon, or are they the team that's gone 9-4 the last 13 games and has actually handled most of their opponents down the stretch? All
right, well, let's hear from the people. Gloria's hanging out in San Francisco. Gloria, how are you?
Doing great, guys. Thanks for taking my call. I really think that Kerr is just going to have to play those young guys, allow them to make their mistakes. Let Kuminga, he's earned his minutes to play a little longer. I know that he could frustrate you at times, but we have witnessed his growth over the past month at least a month, if not a little more. He's earned the right to be out there a little longer. Podziemski adds that necessary energy. I'm so glad that Klay Thompson has come to an understanding where he might best serve them off the bench. Klay, you can see he wears his emotions on his sleeve, and I root for him to just be able to come back to the Klay of yesteryear, but he could redefine who Klay can become. He can become the Ray Allen, the Reggie Miller off the bench and provide, necessary scoring with that second unit. I believe that I don't think that they could go to the finals with this cast. They're still a little too small, and that's going to hurt them in the long run, especially when half-court offenses play them. And I think that they still are going to be too small when it's all said and done, but they can build off the nucleus off this younger core. Thank you, guys.
Good job as always, Gloria. And as I talked about this new show on Hulu, the new streaming show on Netflix called Steph, Draymond, and the Kids, like that. And by the way, somebody out there said, well, look at Detroit or Washington. You can't win with just youth. Yeah, I understand that, which is why Steph and Draymond and the kids is, to me, the remedy. To me, that's the new identity, Steph, Draymond, and the kids going forward. Like, that's what you want to buy into. So who's sort of the odd man looking into all of this, sort of, I think, getting left behind at the bus station, for me at least, is Dario Saric. As we go forward with his new identity, I don't see, Dario to me is looking older and older. Dario is he is such a liability defensively, and even offensively, it's just looking a little bit more awkward as we continue to move along with this new team.
Well, you've taken a few victory laps today, obviously, because Clay's to the bench. You've been asking for pods.
Don't get it, Ev. Let me hear your part, kid.
No. You talked about the win against the Phoenix needing to be necessary. They got it. 2-0 this week. I'm glad you finally came around on Saric. And this is not a knock on him as a person. I think he's very kind. I also think, honestly, I do think that Saric has been affected the most out of all the members of the team by the death of Milojevic because he's closest to him and it's a countryman. So I think that that's also affected him as well. But I just don't really think that he's been a player that's helped them a whole lot this year more than he's hurt them. Like, he has to shoot really well to be an effective player. And whether it's because of the off-the-court issues or just going through a dry spell, if he doesn't make shots, he doesn't help you because he's such a liability on defense.
And I think it's becoming more and more of sort of an eyesore as the younger they get, right? The more this team is playing up-tempo with that sort of energy, the more you can see how he doesn't necessarily fit going forward. All right, Phil Mo, Mike, thanks for hanging out. Let's go to Phil Mo. What's up, my man?
Hey, what's up with it, man? Thanks for taking my call. Y'all sound good this morning. But I think my thing, and I think most people think, is with Kurt. And I'm not really tripping on Dario Saric. I think Dario Saric he's a interesting piece. You can use him when you can. You can't use him. But he's a good player. But anyway, Steve Kerr, it's like he don't like to learn. It's like, bro, I understand. You feel me? You got through with these guys. But the time is now to play your youngsters. Like, you got to encourage them. You got to use positive reinforcement. Whatever you did with Pajinski, do that with all your young players. If they messed up a certain amount of time, give them some rope. You should have been giving these players ropes years ago. Like, if you would have developed them initially, maybe now they would be a lot better. But because you did not develop them initially, we're in the place where we're at. You feel what I'm saying? If Kuminga would have played more as a rookie, he would have did what? Make a lot of mistakes. But guess what? The more mistakes he made then, the less mistakes he's going to make going forward. So that's all we're saying. It's like, bro, read the room, understand you got some dogs, dog, and use them accordingly and stop relying on the OGs. That's all we're saying, Kurt. We're not saying nothing more. Use the youngsters. If you see the game getting out of hand, put the youngsters in. Don't take them out. Coach them after the game, film session, and get it right, bro. It's not that serious. If you would have been playing the youngsters a lot younger, you played Kuminga a lot earlier, Moses Moody a lot earlier, we would have been in a lot better predicament right now, today, going forward. I don't care what anybody say. We probably still would have won a championship that one year. But if you don't play your youngsters and they don't get a chance to develop, and you develop them by, oh, you made a mistake, sit your ass down. That's not development, dog. That's all we saying.
Thanks, Phil Mo.
Thanks, Mike.
I think I would say to that, he has a good point, but in defense of Steve Kerr, is that this is, again, it's not Washington. This isn't Charlotte. This isn't a rebuild. It's not even Minnesota a couple of years ago or OKC, where you can just roll out some of the kids. Or even, the T-Wolves, Ant-Man, do your thing. Make your mistakes. All right? We're not going anywhere. I think the problem with the Golden State Warriors in defense of Steve Kerr is that when you're talking about a team that's sort of plug and play for championships and synonymous with titles, and you're a youngster being integrated into that culture, it's tough to just say, make your mistakes, go ahead and learn on the job. Because typically that's for teams that are quote-unquote in a rebuild, and that's not necessarily applicable to the Golden State Warriors.
No, especially when they drafted someone like Kuminga. Wiseman's different, and he's obviously gone. But I have some thoughts on that on the other side, because I think Mike brings up a couple of interesting points, not just touching on Kerr, but also, of course, the front office as well.
All right, we want to – Nick, some of the other callers, Nick in Ohio, lines 2, 3, and 4, hang on. We got to get to a break. When we continue, we'll talk a lot more about the Golden State Warriors going forward, as the Warriors, during the All-Star break, one game over the 500 mark. What are your thoughts going forward? Is this team going to make a serious run?
Now back to Warriors This Week on 95.7 The Game.
One more hour to go. Evan Giddings and Dan Devone, Warriors This Week. Golden State, like the rest of the NBA, taking the weekend and part of next week off. For the Warriors, they'll get back after it against the Los Angeles Lakers, LeBron James and company. By the way, if you were to believe our man Woj, Adrian Wojnarowski, a guy who, by the way, that I know going back to my days, my early sportscasting days when Adrian Wojnarowski was a sports writer for the Fresno Bee, and I was just starting out as a television sportscaster for CBS, but there you go. But Woj dropping this sort of knowledge that potentially there has been some exploration on the part of the Golden State Warriors at the trade deadline to bring one LeBron James to the Golden State Warriors, which just would have been the ultimate of mistakes, Evan. If you listen, there's one thing that I hammer home is that you don't want to be old. A balance of Hall of Famers and youth, Draymond and Steph and the kids works. But if you start going LeBron James, who's going to be 40, Chris Paul, who's going to be 40, a 36-year-old Steph Curry, and a 34-year-old Draymond Green, count me out. That ain't working, man. I don't care how you dress that thing up.
I think it's really funny because it sounded like the conversation was, number one, initiated by the Warriors. Yeah. Number two, it was initiated by Joe Lacob. Like it was an owner-to-owner conversation from
Sounds
the
like
reports
one
that
of
I read.
Those owner things.
Yeah, like Joe Lacob called Jeannie Buss and was wondering how this was going to work. I think from a Lakers perspective, that was actually kind of a smart move, not to see if LeBron would actually do it. And I think they presented the trade offer to him, and he declined. But the idea from the Lakers' perspective was to gauge where LeBron's allegiance was at this point, because it is kind of around that time where LeBron, in his career, gets a little bit old of his certain situation, and maybe the Lakers don't have enough trade assets for him, and they're not performing well, and so he's going to take his ball and try and go to some other team. And
he has that option again.
Yeah, he's got a player option, so he could go this offseason and move around. But if you're the Warriors, maybe you try and figure out if you could make a run at LeBron this offseason. Monetarily, you'd have to move a lot of things around to do so. And so maybe they're trying to gauge his interest from a Warriors perspective as well for this offseason when he could become a free agent. I don't think that was ever going to happen, the trade. But the idea of LeBron being paired with Curry, I think, is certainly enticing from an entertainment perspective. I don't know if there's two better guys that you want to watch, each and every night. And to put them together, I think would be interesting. But I don't think it would work in terms of basketball.
It'd be interesting for a month, and you'd probably be good. But again, you're two old men that are eventually someone's going to go down with an injury. And if you're not deep any longer and you don't have that youth movement, then you sure as hell better win that title, because there's not much to look forward to after that, because you're going to be in that lottery for the next decade plus. And the Los Angeles Lakers are going to ask for draft picks, and they're going to want Jonathan Kuminga, all right? They're not that stupid. It's LeBron James. So whatever it is that you're giving up in return sure as hell is not worth LeBron James. And also, just come on, man, San Francisco, stand up. From a fan standpoint, he's a Laker. He's LeBron James. He was a Cleveland Cavalier. You don't want him on your team. I get it. If you're about winning titles, maybe LeBron 5 years ago. But how about just simply be from a fan standpoint? It's LeBron James. It's the guy who whines way too much. He's the enemy. He's synonymous with the Lakers. Hey, you don't want that dude on your team. Come on.
He's synonymous with the opposite of, or I guess he's the antithesis to Steph, right? He's arch rival number one in this era. You've got the best of him a few times. Why would you want him on the team?
All right.
I don't know. I mean, look, I did think it was funny and kind of a larger branching point from the Lacob conversation, which it was essentially about, I don't know what you made of this, Dan. But there was some sound from earlier this week off the conversation with Kerr that I thought was interesting about. I'll play these back to back for you. How about that? And we'll react to them. This is Joe Lacob on the Tim Kawakami podcast.
Well, first of all, backwards is never an option. Not for me, not for us. I know that people would say it should be, but I don't think we're ever going to be sellers in a situation like this in a big way. But, there were things we could have done that might have looked that way, that might have been setting us up for something better next year. There are players, we could have gotten off a contract here or there that would have created even more flexibility this summer, let's say. And we already have some good flexibility. There are things that we could have done. And I wouldn't call that backwards. I would call that setting it up for the next move.
So we don't want to go backwards, right? And then here's what he followed up with in terms of the payroll flexibility in Plan 1 or 1A.
We have expiring contracts this summer. We have a lot of flexibility as a result. And that was pretty important given the changes in the CBA. You really can't have this kind of payroll in the future without being severely impacted in terms of things you can do, as you know. And our fans know, the second apron, you've all heard the words. It's all really true, and it does impact us. So we're already in really good position for that this summer. We'll make decisions based, on how we're doing and so on. But honestly, we had opportunity during this trade line. I don't think it's too much to say that we had a deal that would have saved us literally net $80 million this year, not even next year. That's a pretty big thing not to do, I guess, if you're motivated by financials. And financials, I guess, in all honesty, as you said, in the face of, performing below expectations, which we have up to this point this year, no one with a $400 million payroll wants to be a 500 team. And I certainly don't. But there are reasons for things, and things do change. And so this was a tough trade deadline. We had to make some pretty big decisions for the short term and take some gambles. And we also had to maintain our flexibility going forward.
So again, not wanting to go backwards, but also understanding that getting out of the tax and not having this payroll at the number that it is the first and foremost thing you want to do this offseason.
Yeah, and he's flipping that bill. So it was very much from the vantage point of an owner because he's writing those checks. But as an owner, when it comes to, I don't even enjoy an owner speaking French with the oui, what we have to do. Now, what you have to do is just write the checks and get the hell out of the way. Let Dunleavy, let Steve Kerr, let the powers that be sit in the room and make basketball decisions. Sorry.
That's never been Joe Lacob, though.
No, I know. And he's a hell of an owner.
That's more Jed York.
Yeah. He's a hell of an owner, but when you hear about let's get LeBron, that just sounds like, it sounds like an owner. It just sounds like an owner move. From a basketball standpoint, to me, it doesn't make sense on 35 different levels. All right, Nick's been hanging out. Let's get out to Massillon, Ohio. I have no idea if you're in Massillon, Ohio. I just always like saying Massillon. What's going on, Nick? How are you?
Good, doing good, guys. Springfield, Ohio. But anyway, I'm not looking forward to Chris Paul coming back. I just don't see how he really helps the team. He slows the game down. He's taking time away from particularly the youngsters that everybody's been saying we need more time. They're playing fine without him. So what do you guys think? I'm coming late to the game, so you may have already covered this.
Well, you're never late on 95.7 The Game, Nick. Come on, man.
We could have used you about an hour ago, Nick. Come on, step the game up, buddy.
No, so Nick, I guess I would ask what your concern with Chris Paul, your biggest concern. Is it taking minutes away from the young guys, or is it something like him slowing the game down when they feel like they've been playing well with pace?
Both.
Okay. That's fair. Thanks, Nick. I think, those would be my two primary concerns. I think that the move to the bench for Klay Thompson is a sign that when Chris Paul comes back, it's not going to just be like the way it was. This is a different basketball. I think he's missed 17 games now. This is a very different basketball team than it was 17 games ago. So, and I also don't think Chris Paul, I don't think Chris Paul's an idiot, right? He sees what's working. He sees what's not. He's been in the league for 18 plus years. He understands how to win. And I think he also understands that at this point in his career, much like Klay Thompson, and he took this sacrifice before the season started. Remember, he was the guy who had started 1,000+ straight games and then came off the bench. He'd started for longer than Klay Thompson had. But he wants to win. And I think he sees where he fits in this team, maybe even better than some of the coaches, just because he's had more experience. I don't think Chris Paul is going to hurt this team. What I'm interested to see is if he's okay with taking an even further diminished role, because I think that's probably how it's going to start. Like, he'll play 20 or 25 minutes, and he was playing close to 30 minutes before his injury. I also don't think he is as important for all 48 minutes as he was before his injury, but I do think in the critical moments, like the game against Utah, for example, or the game against the Clippers, I think that is a time where having a floor general on the court can help you sort of stabilize or rewrite the momentum that you're clearly losing. Because as great as Steph Curry is, and as great as Klay Thompson can be, the one area that they sometimes lack is in possession and awareness. Like, let me run this by you, Dan. So we know about the foul that Klay Thompson committed against the Clippers, right? I don't know if you caught this on Saturday, a week ago, against Phoenix. Before Curry hit that game winner, right? Before he threw up the shot and won the game, it was going crazy. Who called the timeout in order to force that out-of-bounds play?
Podziemski.
It was Steve Kerr.
Okay.
Because when Curry grabbed the rebound, he turned and took a dribble. He did not immediately call timeout.
So they got it, yes. Okay.
Steve Kerr had to run out onto the court to call timeout because Curry, it didn't look like to me, knew time and situation.
Also, they would have had it in the backcourt as opposed to half court.
Exactly, to advance it.
Yeah.
So Curry turned, took a dribble, and it's like he was going to launch a three-quarters court shot because he didn't know how many timeouts he had. That's a situation where if Chris Paul's on the floor, he grabs that rebound, boom, timeout. Immediately knows what is supposed to be done and the play that's supposed to be made. That's where I think he can impact the Warriors in a positive fashion.
Well, let me ask you this, and I think I know the answer to it, but let me just put this to you. Who's the Warriors' sixth man now coming off the bench?
It's probably going to be, so actually I think it's kind of 6 and 7 are tied. It's going to be Chris and Klay. Like, if you notice the way that they were bringing pods off the bench when Klay was starting in recent weeks, they brought him and Peyton in at the same time. So I think it's going to be something similar where Chris and Klay both come in at the same time.
It's going to be interesting because you're right. The identity of this basketball team, again, because of the youth movement, has changed. And so Chris Paul has to assimilate to this new team. It's not the other way around. And just what this new team is, it's a team now that's fast. It's a team now that runs. It's a team now that does all the things that Chris Paul typically does not like to do, or just not more effective at doing it. He's a half-court guy, and especially now at age 38, he's walking the ball up the floor. He's not beating guys to the spot, and he's not beating guys up the floor. He's not filling lanes, and he's not pushing the attack. He'll balance the floor, and he'll put the ball in the guy's right hands. He's sort of a player coach. He's cerebral. The one thing that he won't do, that you know, and you can bet on this and take it to the bank, he won't turn the ball over. Mm-hmm. And you cannot enforce or reiterate that enough. Does he fit in terms of tempo? We'll see. And I don't think Steve Kerr really knows at this point. It's going to be interesting when he comes back. And if he doesn't, well, then much like that of Jonathan Kuminga or Trace Jackson Davis, he's got to get the quick hook because he cannot force feed, or you cannot, shove this square peg into a round hole, that being Chris Paul, and saying, okay, it's the veteran, guys, let's slow it down and work accordingly. No, you've got to catch up to the way things are being done right now because you're playing your best basketball in the season. But the fact that he doesn't turn the ball over, and the fact that, he knows where the ball should be, he knows how to balance things, are all assets and are clearly things that the Golden State Warriors need. Because when we talk about, well, why are the Warriors collapsing towards the end of games? Why do the Warriors relinquish big leads? Well, a lot of that goes hand in hand with the fact that you don't secure the basketball. And that's one area, obviously, where Chris Paul lives. He'll make sure that you're not giving up needless points, that you're just simply not handing the ball to the other team and giving up a bucket that otherwise, if you're procuring the ball, a lot of these leads, maybe you don't win by 15, but the leads are much more secure when a guy handling the basketball and distributing it is Chris Paul as opposed to someone like that as Steph Curry.
Yeah, I think my concern with CP would just be on the defensive end because you're going to be really small, specifically in the backcourt, and there's some teams that have larger guards that could take advantage of CP or Steph defensively. But on the offensive side, you're right. Like, I think I struggle sometimes to find basically a guy on the court not named Steph Curry that I trust to set someone up or to make a play down the stretch of the game. And Chris Paul allows Curry to move off ball. He, I think, can run pick and roll with Draymond, who's also a good decision maker. And it involves Draymond in a way that doesn't demand him to essentially just be unguardable in the corner. So, and Chris Paul can also can operate in the mid-range if he needs to. I think that is how I look at it as far as the closing lineup. For the totality of the game, I actually kind of like the way, and I wonder if this is how Kerr is setting up his bench, which is, so Klay moves to the bench. I didn't think it needed to happen against Utah. I should say I was surprised it happened against Utah. I thought it might be something that happens after the All-Star break. But what I think he's trying to set up is, okay, Klay, because I feel like Chris Paul is someone who can activate Klay, and they actually tried to do that earlier this season by moving CP into the starting lineup. Now what I think we'll see is Chris and Klay playing off each other in the second unit, and that's because Chris Paul likes to play slower, and Klay Thompson, just because of the age and attrition and his injuries, I think has to play slower. He's not as fast getting up and down the court. So I think that'll be beneficial for him too. And then maybe you see more of Saric, I don't know, but I just think Chris Paul is someone that can help you preserve leads easier than another person that's running that second unit or even closing lineup sometimes at the point guard position.
Well, in order to preserve leads, you have to play smart, and you can't turn the ball over again, which plays right into the hands of Chris Paul. I would say this, and I hope I get the benefit of the doubt, Hev, that another conversation has to take place with the head coach Steve Kerr, this time with his other guard, and that being Steph Curry. Now, when I say I get the benefit of the doubt, it's because I'm going to remind everybody that not only a week ago, but for weeks, I've been clamoring that they've got to start. Podziemski has got to replace Klay Thompson in the starting lineup. But here's another conversation I think Steve Kerr has to have with his other legendary, all-worldly basketball player and maybe the greatest shooter to ever do it, and that is Steph Curry.
Maybe.
I would sit him down and I would say, listen, we'll go as far as you take us. However, I need you to stop turning the ball over. I need you to make a concerted effort of taking care of the basketball. Now, I know you could say, well, that's just, what if you do that, you cripple basically Steph Curry, because that's the way he plays. It's a free-flowing style, and those passes are all part of his, they sort of intertwine with his step-back threes and his getting to the rim. Like, you can't have one without the other. I would say, with all that being said, Steph, you have thrown your last no-look pass from the hip cross-court. You can't do that. I'm just curious if that conversation has ever taken place. And if it hasn't, during the All-Star break, you can go on a fishing trip or wherever it is that they can go hang out for a day and just say, my man, you're the head of the chicken, all right? Like, it all runs through you, right? So you have got to stop turning the ball over because it's infectious and there's a trickle-down effect. And as great as you are, and you know me when it comes to sportscasting, I rarely throw out that word. There are a few things that are great. Jesus was great. When you talk about basketball players, Magic Johnson and Michael Jordan was great. When I hear an analyst saying that was a great 2-yard run, I'm like, come on, man, have a deeper vocabulary than that. But as far as great, Steph Curry is great. And as a great player, I need you to set the tone and stop making haphazard passes because it's happening with too much frequency, especially towards the end of games. I see you smiling over there and you're chomping at the bit. Go ahead.
Yeah, it was a difficult 2-yard run. It was a wholesome 2-yard run. There are different ways you could talk about it. But I'm glad you brought this up because I do want to debunk this idea that, look, Curry's been a turnover machine his entire life. And I mean that in the kindest possible way.
Give me that stat in college.
No, well, yeah, he turned it over 10 times in the first half of his first college game. That's neither here nor there. But the thing is, this season, I think this is the Chris Paul effect. Like, what if I told you that on average he's turning the ball over the third fewest of his 15 years.
This year?
Yes.
I wouldn't believe you.
I know. It's pretty crazy, right?
That is
true.
Fact?
It is true.
All right.
No, this is the third fewest turnovers he's had on average in his career. I would also ask you, who do you think turns the ball over like in clutch time, crunch time? LeBron or Steph?
Well, you're setting me up there, so I'll say LeBron.
LeBron does. He turns the ball over more than Curry does in clutch time. Anthony Edwards also turns the ball over more in clutch time than Steph Curry. So I understand that there are these, I don't know if it's just like associations with looseness, and it's well documented, but Curry's actually been better with the ball this year, especially down the stretch, than he has in years past. I think what's been so glaring about the turnovers is because they've tended to coincide with lapses defensively, breakdowns, mental errors. That kind of stuff has also followed him, as well as someone like Klay Thompson. And when they're involved in so many close games, those turnovers stick with you more. So even though Curry has not been as bad at, or been better at taking care of the ball this year than in years past, I don't think it's necessarily not an issue. It's just, I think Chris Paul would be able to alleviate some of that pressure.
Well, you're good today, man. You just set me up, having me walk right into the torture chamber and just slicing me up. I would say this, as the defense attorney here, or the prosecutor going after one Steph Curry, is that it might be the third least in his career, but still, comparatively speaking, when you're talking about Steph Curry, it's still probably the number's too high. And as far as comparing him to turnovers of, Anthony Edwards of Minnesota, who I don't watch closely enough towards the latter parts of games, or LeBron James even, is that I think a lot of Steph Curry's turnovers are preventative. Like, I don't know that LeBron James is trying to make that pass from the hip and threading the needle cross court when he doesn't have to. I think oftentimes, and I don't know this for fact, but I think LeBron James will get double teamed and tries to power through it or get stripped. Anthony Edwards can be out of control. Steph is trying to be Curly Neal from the Harlem Globetrotters when he doesn't need to. And I get it. That's just the way he plays. And I'm just saying, if I'm Steve Kerr, all that being true, what it is you just laid out, I'm just like, can we reduce that? Can you at least be conscious of it? Can it just, at least my thoughts of what I'm saying to you right now as the head coach of the Golden State Warriors, at least be dancing in your head? Because as a coach, I have to approach this because the turnovers are losing me games, or at least making things a lot more interesting when they don't necessarily have to be. All right, back out to the phone lines, off to Virginia. Let's hear from Dre. Dre, what's up, man? How are you?
What's going on? Thank you for taking my call. So I feel like the Warriors fans are being too hard on Steve Kerr, honestly. I think if you look back at his career, he's really given us no reason not to trust him. I feel like there's never been a season as a coach where he's underachieved. His first year he came in, won a championship. Second year he came in, he had the best record in the NBA. And then if it weren't for Draymond being suspended and then Andre Iguodala and Andrew both getting hurt, probably would have won a championship. Then he won 2 more with KD. If it weren't for KD's injury, Clay's injury, would have won another championship. And everyone in 22 wants to say that they knew we were going to win a championship, but nobody knew that. And I would say that, nobody expected Andrew Wiggins to play the way he played. And I feel like he overachieved in that season. And then the season following that, Draymond Green punches Jordan Poole in the face, which throws off all the vibes of the team moving forward. But if you remember that season, we had the best home record in the NBA. We just had a bad road record. And we still got to the 6th seed with Anthony Lamb and Ty Jerome. And if it weren't for Klay scoring 8 points against the Lakers in consecutive games, we probably would have made to the Western Conference Finals. So for everybody, being down on Steve Kerr as if he doesn't know what he's doing, I think that doesn't make any sense. And then also to defend Steve Kerr on the development side of things. When people say he's not a good development coach, the way I look at that is that, has there been any young player who has left the Warriors and been better on another team than they were with the Warriors? If you look at Jordan Poole, Eric Pascal, who was first team or second team all-rookie, Pat McCaw, I forgot the one guy that they drafted from, I think, Texas Tech or something like that. But anyway, all the younger players that they've drafted nobody has left the Warriors and been better. So obviously Steve Kerr was maximizing the young talent that we did have on this team, made them playable and winnable players. And even if you're looking at Jordan Poole or James Wiseman, when they go to different teams, they might not be as good as we thought they actually were. So I just don't get why so many people are.
Dre, thank you so much. We got to get to a break. That was all well said. And yeah, let's talk about Steve Kerr and what it is that you just commented on. Chris, hang out. Rest of the callers, stay with us. Got to pay some bills. Back right after this.
Are you curious about who offers the best deals on top-rated Samsung, LG, and Sony TVs? The answer is surprising. It's not online, and it's not the warehouse clubs. The best deals on top-rated TVs are at Video Only. Don't believe it? Then check out the trade-in deals at Video Only. How about $500 for your old TV? Try doing that online. Before you buy that new TV, drop into Video Only. If you don't, you'll be sorry.
Here's to everyone who was made to shine from Shane Company. To wearing your lucky gold chain to the game, to receiving your first communion in your new pearls. Here's to getting down on one knee, to recommitting to forever, to saying yes to something sparkly just for you, just because. Here's to your first set of diamond studs, to the family heirloom you'll never take off. Here's to lighting up the room like only you can. Shane Company, fine jewelry since 1929.
In order for small businesses to thrive, they need to be smart, efficient, savvy, staying ahead of the market at every turn, finding ways to do more with less, and taking advantage of every opportunity that comes their way. That's why Comcast Business is introducing the Small Business Bonus. For a limited time, you can get up to a $1,000 prepaid card when you switch to Comcast Business, the company with the largest, fastest, reliable network. So if you're a small business owner, don't wait. Call or go online to learn about the $1,000 bonus today.
Give your business a head start in 2024. Get started with fast speeds and advanced security for $49.99 a month for 12 months with a 2-year agreement. Call or go online to switch today. Ends 2/21/24. Restrictions apply. New customers only with 50 megabits per second internet and security edge. EcoBill and autopay required. Equipment, taxes, and fees extra. Prepaid card offer requires premium internet.
Timing is everything. And now is the time to buy, California, during the year-end sell-a-thon at your California Ford dealers. It's time for our biggest offers of the year on the entire Ford lineup of trucks and SUVs, like the built Ford Tough F-150, part of Ford F-Series, America's best-selling trucks for 46 years and counting. Or the adventure-ready Ford Bronco Sport with GOAT modes to help you conquer the great outdoors. And the always electrifying Ford Mustang Mach-E with 0 to 60 thrills and 0 emissions. Now's the time to buy during the year-end sell-a-thon at your California Ford dealers with exclusive offers on your favorite Ford vehicles. And now is your time to get behind the wheel of the Ford truck or SUV you've always wanted. But time is running out. These offers absolutely end on January 2nd. Visit your California Ford dealer today, based on 1977 to 2022 calendar year total sales.
Proposition Chicken. This chicken goes 3 ways. Oh, yeah.
Proposition Chicken and Prop C on the Fly have been serving award-winning fried chicken for over a decade. Our chicken goes 3 ways. From slow-roasted rotisserie to crispy barbecue tofu, our from-scratch food is made with better ingredients. Stop by, pick up, or have it delivered from 12 Bay Area locations. Order now at PropositionChicken.com.
Proposition Chicken. This chicken goes 3 ways.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard this Air France radio announcement. Our very best 90th anniversary fares have just landed. From now until February 21st, enjoy our very best prices during the Air France rendezvous and benefit from our 90 years of experience in design, comfort, and fine dining. Book your rendezvous with Paris with daily flights from San Francisco starting at $1,385 round trip, taxes included. Elegance is a journey. Air France. Round trip purchase required. Advertised fare not available on all flights. Additional restrictions apply. See terms and conditions at airfrance.us.
Pajamas are comfy and help me get a good night's sleep. But many foster kids don't even have PJs. To help foster kids feel at home on that first night, Mancini Sleep World and the Ticket to Dream Foundation are hosting a new pajama collection drive in all Mancini Sleep World locations. Whether it's footy PJs, nightshirts, or sweats, we'll match them with a foster kid or teen. Just drop off new PJs in any size to your local Mancini Sleep World store. To learn more, visit sleepworld.com. CordelCom.
Attorney Joe Cordell.
Business owners and professionals face special challenges in divorce court. In addition to everything else going on, they have to contend with allegations that they are earning more than they are, coupled with claims on their business or practice itself. Clients with assets depend on their divorce lawyer's skills in these matters, and that's why it's so important to hire someone that has those skills.
Schedule an appointment with one of Cordell & Cordell's California area attorneys. 2121 North California Boulevard, Suite 290, Walnut Creek, California, 94596.
He's the best in the business, and you can find Tim Roy's Call of the Game on our social media platforms after every home game. Call of the Game, presented by Xfinity, the Xfinity 10G network, the best way to stream your Warriors.
School sports are played by humans, coached by humans, and officiated by humans. So the next time you're sitting in the stands at a school athletic event, please remember this and maintain your humanity, especially when it comes to judging and critiquing athletes, coaches, and officials. Please show your fellow humans some respect. They'll appreciate your empathy.
This message presented by the CIF and the California State Athletic Directors Association.
With your choice of select sandwich, nugs, fries, and a drink, Wendy's $5 Biggie Bag is your go-to. Your nugget wingman. Your hot and crispy fry co-pilot.
Just like us. We're like the bag boys.
What?
Bag boys, what you gonna do? What you gonna do when we bring your food?
For a deal you can count on, bet on Biggie and choose wisely. Choose Wendy's.
Bag boys.
U.S. price and participation may vary. Includes choice of JVC or crispy chicken sandwich with 4-piece nugs, junior fry, and small soft drink. Third-party delivery pricing may be higher.
Now back to Warriors This Week on 95.7 The Game.
According to the Comcast business text line, Evans, apparently you're misleading me with some of your
I saw this
statistics concerning one Steph Curry and his turnovers throughout his career. So,
Oh, well, it had to do with his assist to turnover ratio, which, of course, his assists are down this year, but that has nothing to do with taking care of the ball. Like, his usage rate is still the same. He's still involved in as many plays. He's just not as much of a facilitator as he's been in years past because he's had to score more, as you know, Dan.
Gene's hanging out in Oakland, California, wants to join the big program in the last half hour. Gino, what's up, buddy?
Hey, guys. Thanks for putting me on. So, first of all, I want to try to build on that previous caller's comments chronicling all the reasons why Kerr has been such a great coach, all right? Listen. Yeah, he's had his bad times. He's made mistakes. I mean, by his own admission, last year was a terrible year for him. But the one thing about him, he's willing to grow. He's willing to admit his mistakes, learn from them. And I trust the guy. When he tells us something, I believe it. When he told us early on when Wiggins was struggling, he said, "Listen, the guy just needs to get into a rhythm. He's been taken out of things with physical problems, some emotional issues. So just wait, he'll come around." And now we're seeing the same Wiggs we had 2 years ago. When he was, by my reckoning, frankly, the best overall player in the finals. He said, all these people are starting to, once again, wanting to drive Draymond Green to the airport, and get rid of him after this last major incident. He said, "Listen, man, this is the core of the team. This is a heartbeat. Try to remind us again. We need this guy if we're going to win anything. And look how well they're playing since he's come back." So, and he's also said, "Listen, I believe in this team. I believe that we can go far. Just wait till we get it figured out." They're figuring it out, and I'm going to trust them yet again.
Thanks, Gene. Yeah, listen, when it comes to Steve Kerr, first of all, I'd stop short of Wiggins. He's been playing much better, but he's not back to where he was 2 years ago. But yeah, there are signs. As far as Steve Kerr goes, let's not get this twisted. As far as head coaches go, this guy is not a televangelist. He's not some cheesy dude that's trying to sell you something. He's not a politician. He's about as real, about as cerebral, about as good of a human being that you're going to see in a coach's uniform, a coach's suit, or in the coach's in a coaching status at any professional sport. All right, so you have to recognize just how a cut above he is, just first and foremost as a person. Like he's just politically astute. He's smart about, he's aware about the community. He's self-aware about the world we live in as it relates to, seeing these players as young men and developing them and throughout their formative years as being good people. I mean, he's different. So let's make sure that we establish that when it comes to Steve Kerr as a head coach. I think you have to understand what it is that we do, whether it's Warriors this week or when you're analyzing a basketball team, especially one that struggled, and Kerr will admit as much, that he's made mistakes. And we're just here to sort of be the pulse of the people and crack the head coach for, mistakes that we observed. This obviously isn't us. It's nothing's personal. We certainly don't feel as though we're going overboard, but he's not above our criticism, or I won't throw Ev into this, but maybe my criticism, just like any other coach and just like any other show that's going to review a basketball team or a baseball team or a football team, the coach is just part of that equation. But I think when you see this from a sort of the overview or from 30,000 feet above, he is a Hall of Fame-esque coach. And more importantly, as a person, I'm a big fan of his as well. All right, Chris is driving around in his car. What's up, Chris? How are you today? Welcome to the show.
Doing great. Thank you, guys. Nice show, and thanks for taking my call. So last Saturday I called in. You were kind enough to speak with me. I talked about Kerr's communication skills and the assumptions that were being made that he had not yet had any conversations with Clay about a different role. And it sure appears now that perhaps Kerr had already had those conversations with Clay. I think now there are some assumptions being made that he hasn't had conversations with Steph Curry about carelessness. Come on, fellas. That stuff's on every film session. Curry's mistakes are on every film session. In fact, Curry is so accountable that you read quotes from him all the time about seeing it on film and how careless he had been. So those communications, I think, take place all the time. My point is this. You cannot change Steph Curry after 15 years, and every no-look, over-the-shoulder pass to the other side of the court is not a turnover. Many, many times, those passes result in something good happening. So the point is, you're not going to take that out of his game because that is part of what makes Steph Curry great. You have to find a way to live with it, and of course, his recklessness kills everybody. We all scream at the TV when he throws a ridiculous pass that gets intercepted, especially under a minute left in the game. But my point is, I am sure that is a constant topic of conversation amongst the team in every film session. What do you guys think?
Chris, man, you got to call back again next Saturday. I love your stuff. And yes, I do remember your call last week. I absolutely do. And I would say this, and again, we talked about, just to go back to your call last week, you said you felt as though the conversations had taken place between Steve Kerr and Klay Thompson. And I had to clarify in saying specifically removing him from the starting lineup, because that's what I was talking about. And then Steve Kerr clarified that, yes, he had that conversation the morning of the Utah game when he made the change. They look at film study, and certainly this has to have been, you're right, Chris, this has been brought to his attention. I'm just curious because Coach Kerr always talks about, listen, he has the latitude to do anything. He's one of the few players playing the game right now where, Steph, you do as you do, okay? There are no checks and balances necessarily in place when it comes to Steph Curry and his game. So I'm just curious, not necessarily in a team study or with everybody on hand looking at film or what have you, or looking at video, but just a one-on-one, much like that of the conversation he had with Klay Thompson when you're no longer starting, just something that was just, listen, I don't do this with you very often, but as we go forward to the most important part of the season, let's talk about you and turnovers. And I'm just curious if that conversation, if it ever has taken place, and whether or not it would take place going forward.
I don't think Stephen Curry is above being reprimanded. And I think he would understand it. I mean, he knows his flaws better than anyone, right? So It's not as if it's a delicate conversation to have, but I just don't think it's as simple as Steve Kerr sitting him down and saying, hey, Steph, quit turning over the basketball. Like you can't really approach, again, to Chris's point, a 15-year vet like you do a third grader when you're teaching them how to play basketball. So I think for Steph down the stretch, I think that's why they went out and got Chris Paul. What's one way to help someone who is sometimes careless with the basketball is to get probably the most careful player maybe ever in the league in terms of taking care of the basketball, and that's Chris Paul. So I think he's going to help coming back. But I think it's larger than just Steph and his turnovers, and we're mainly talking about crunch time. Like he's loose with the ball in the first quarter. That doesn't really hurt you. Where it can hurt you, and the examples you brought up of the behind-the-back passes would be like down the stretch of a critical game that you need to win. I think that you have to take the good with the bad. So it's interesting because I'm with you that I don't think Klay Thompson has necessarily changed either. I just think that he's more open because of perhaps his failures as well as his declining productivity to having a condensed role in which he can still be himself, but maximizing what he has left. Curry, clearly, when maximized, is still a top 10 NBA player, might be a top 5 NBA player. Like he's still not at the peak of his powers, but he's still extremely good. So it's much more difficult to say, hey, Steph, we're going to talk about, reorganizing your role or not. Like, no, you need him out there in crunch time. I also think sometimes Draymond can get careless with the basketball in crunch. We've seen him have some boneheaded turnovers. We've seen him make some not so smart plays. I mean, Kuminga, that's understandable because he's younger. Like he made, a careless turnover against Utah down the stretch of that game. He gets back cut sometimes. Podziemski isn't perfect. Like those are learning moments, but again, I just think that we focus in on the veterans because they've been there before, that they're not supposed to make those mistakes, even though it's kind of been something that's followed them their whole career. So instead of trying to change Curry or change Klay, I guess I would just like to see Kerr be able to help them more with whether it's rotation pieces around them, whether it's with schematic type of differences in these sort of games. And I think that Chris Paul coming back is an anchor for Curry to lean on a little bit in those tight moments because he takes care of the basketball better than just about anyone.
Well, what did Steph Curry say earlier this year? What's the definition of insanity?
Doing the same thing over and over.
And I guess that's where I would draw the line. It's that it's happened with such a high level of repetition that you can almost sort of set your watch to it. And I would say that when it comes to Klay Thompson, I would say that there has been a notable change with him in his latter years. That I think whether it was an ultimatum or any conversations he had with Steve Kerr, message heard. Because he's no longer that guy that is hunting shots or that guy that is shooting the ill-advised three, but playing more within the role of the team, letting the game. How many times do we talk about the game coming to Klay, getting to the mid-range, making a late pass, working in that pick and roll with Trace Jackson Davis or Kevon Looney? A lot of the shots he's putting up now are sort of within, what it is that they're trying to do offensively. It's not the Klay show anymore. So I think there's been some buy-in on the part of a veteran like that of a Klay Thompson as late as this year. And so as it relates to Steph Curry, there's going to be mistakes. In fact, he turned the ball over against against the Clippers, right when the Clippers were making that run in the beginning of the fourth quarter. And it was a double team, and he tried to throw over the top of it. It got deflected. They went the other way for layup. I don't put that on Steph Curry. You're going to turn the ball over, especially if you're going to have the ball in your hands as often as he does. And as far as, Jonathan Kuminga, yes, he's young, and that turnover he made on basically a 5-on-3 against Utah. They had two guys lying on the floor, and he tried to throw cross-court to Wiggins. What are you doing there? Yeah, he got a little sped up, and it happens for younger players, and some guys get beat with a backdoor cut. What's agonizing, again, when it gets back to Steph Curry, are the preventable mistakes. The throwing a pass from your hip cross-court or trying to do something no-look when you don't have to. That, to me, if I'm Steve Kerr, that would keep me up at nights because that's just a teachable moment. And I know, as a guy that's been in the league for 15 years, you have to tread or sort of balance that line of, okay, look, I don't want to insult him, and he's one of the greatest to ever do it. I recognize that. But in terms of me as a coach and winning games going forward, we have to address the turnovers. And especially when you're talking about, because I think they go hand in hand, as getting back to our earlier point where you're squandering leads late in games, I think turnovers certainly have a lot to do with it. And I don't ever think you're too late in your career to learn anything, especially when it comes to reducing the sort of turnovers, again, that are within his control. You know, Steph Curry he was doing a lot of this last year. From time to time, Draymond or Kevon Looney will get a pass or get a rebound. They'll outlet to Steph, and then Steph will see somebody streaking ahead, whether it's Wiggins or whether it's Kuminga, and he throws one of the most beautiful chest passes, like 40 feet on a line. Like it's right out of the Red Holtzman's fundamental school of basketball. It's such a pretty sight to see. Like that you like to see. Give me a two-handed chest pass, a two-handed bounce pass. But what's difficult to swallow, I guess, just from an optics standpoint, is the careless turnover that otherwise didn't need to be. There were a lot of other options you could have had aside from doing something that was careless and hurt the team.
Look, it doesn't make him acceptable, but I just, again, that's kind of the yin and the yang of what you get with Curry. Like, you get so much greatness that he's not a perfect player. I mean, okay, we have the same conversation with guys who can't make free throws down the stretch of games. Like, okay, how come they don't work on their free throws? I don't know. They just can't hit it. Like, anytime that, for example, Andrew Wiggins steps to the free throw line in the fourth quarter of a basketball game, what is your confidence level that he's going to make both? Not very high, in my opinion. Why? Because he never has. That's just not who he is. Same thing right now with Kuminga and his aggression in the fourth quarter. That's something that he can get better at, but I'm not going to ask a 10-year vet, whether it be Wiggins or a 15-year vet in Curry, to all of a sudden become a different player. What I would like to see is some of the pressure taken off of Steph, and I think that, to me, is not an indictment of his powers or how good he is. I think that's just what you need in order to win. Again, we talked about the reason why the Clippers came back, or a reason why the Clippers came back from down 15 in the second half, because Norman Powell was on fire. That's not named Paul George. That's not named James Harden. That's not even Russell Westbrook or Kawhi Leonard, who was inactive. That's your sixth man that's stepping up and hitting big shots. What's a big reason why the Warriors lost the second-round series against the Lakers last year? A guy named Lonnie Walker. No one had ever heard about him before, but he was someone that stepped up when the moment demanded it to. The Warriors, I think, Curry's going to win you the majority of the basketball games. If he plays well, you're probably going to be in a position to win. But how can the rest of the team help Steph? That's not to say that Steph shouldn't throw the ball away, and it's not excusing the turnovers. But I just feel like more often than not, one of the reasons, or the biggest reason, in my opinion, they've blown these double-digit leads, especially late in games, has been because everyone is playing a four corners offense and looking at 30 and saying, bail us out. And you know what? More often than not, Curry might be able to bail you out. But in the times that he can't, I'm looking at other players on the team and saying, how come you can't take a possession off from Steph? Steph's 35 years old. He's not going to be able to play pedal to the metal 110% each and every possession. I thought he looked gassed on the tail end of a back-to-back against Utah. I think he's looked tired at different points this season, and that's why he's settling for these long threes. That three-pointer against the Suns was like a desperation heave that he needed to shoot because of the possession, but also...
Really? I thought he shot that like a free throw. That was so
it was
fluid.
Pure as hell.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like against the Lakers in double OT, there were a couple shots that it just felt like he shot with his arms because he had no legs left. And some of them went in and some of them don't. But I guess I would prefer that the Warriors, when they have leads, would control them by not just leaning on, well, if Steph makes it, then we'll win, and if not, then we'll lose. Like, I just don't think that the Warriors are in a position, they're good enough right now to rely on that being the A plan each and every night. Because that's probably going to lead to where they're at, which is a game above 500. And as we've discussed, you're going to have to play a lot better than 500 basketball if you want to capture a 7 or an 8 seed or even higher.
Well, it gets back to what we were talking about, or at least what I was talking about, and that is the Warriors are at their best when they have the ball moving and everybody's getting involved. Like that Brooklyn game, he had 9 points, but it was the scoring was so balanced, including the first one against Utah this week, with Klay Thompson and Wiggins and Podziemski, everybody was in double digits. That's when you're an effective basketball team. But I guess the point is, Ev, it's not four corners. I don't think Wiggins and Kuminga would want to just simply say, Steph, take us home. I think that's either by design, by Steve Kerr saying, let's put it in his hands, or it's taken upon Steph Curry saying, I'm the guy. I want the ball, and I'm in a two-man game with Draymond Green. I think Wiggins or any NBA player in the fourth quarter would tell you, I want the ball in my hands. I can go too. But I think this is either done by Steph Curry, or it's just Steve Kerr, or just the way things are done with the Golden State Warriors simply by structure and by design, that those guys are not included, and all that ball movement and all that distribution, the well-balanced scoring suddenly goes out the door when it comes to a close contest down the stretch. It becomes the Steph, and it becomes this one-dimensional show again.
But I think that, look, I think it's by design in the final minute or 30 seconds. I'm not saying like your best
30
player.
30 seconds, yes. But
like your best player is going to take you home. That's understood. But what I'm talking about is when Steph Curry checks in with 8.5 minutes left against the Clippers, and you see the lead dwindling and dwindling and dwindling, it can't just be give it to Steph and let him figure it out. I know
that's the point. Are they giving it to him, or is he taking it?
I think they're giving it to him. At least I would say I don't know about the Utah game because I didn't watch that one as closely down the stretch, but the Clippers game I was at, I saw a passive Andrew Wiggins. I saw a passive Jonathan Kuminga. And that's maybe understandable for Kuminga because he's 21 years old. There was a passive Podziemski in that situation until Klay checked back in and made a boneheaded decision. But the game might have already been lost by that point anyways because you'd blown a 15-point lead. When he checks in with 8 minutes left, it's Steph, you're fresh, you got to rest, take us home. Okay, I don't think that needs to be the focus, or if that's his intention, from the 8-minute mark. I still think they can play with ball movement and motion, but I just felt like the wings, specifically in that game, it hasn't been all the time, but specifically against the Clippers, I felt like Kuminga and Wiggins, I didn't notice them. I didn't notice them at all down the stretch of that game. And that to me indicates there's a passivity there that I at least would like to see changed. And I don't know if it's because they're afraid to go to the free throw line. I don't know if it's because they feel like they should defer and Curry should be taking the shots. That's fair as well. Or if, to your point, maybe it's coaching and Kerr wants Curry to initiate everything and be the focus of everything. I just feel like when Curry gets ball dominant in the final 5-6 minutes of a game, you need someone else because eventually doubles are going to come. There's going to be traps. He might get loose with the ball. Someone else has to take pressure off of him. And more often than not, in these blown leads, there's been a trend that hasn't been the case.
All right, when we take a look at the Golden State Warriors when they return to action back at home against the Los Angeles Lakers, that's next Thursday with a 7 o'clock tip. And then they've got the Charlotte Hornets come to town. Some of those cupcakes and of course you can't overlook anybody, but the schedule does play into their favor in the second half of the campaign. And we've got a couple of days off here, but just taking a look at the Golden State Warriors in the closing moments in the second half of the season, how do you think things stack up, and how do you see things going forward?
Well, I think if they keep playing the basketball they are, whether it's they're going to blow some games, they're probably going to lose late to some good teams, but if they can, if you put together 3 out of 4 stretches, you're going to be in position to challenge for that 7-8 seed. Again, I think the ceiling for this team would be the 6 seed. I think the floor is where they're at now, the 10. Realistically, I see this team finishing ideally 19-10, 18-11, and that would position them to jump the 3 teams in front of them for the 7 seed or maybe the 8 seed. I think the goal for the Golden State Warriors in the final 29 games should be to have a home game in the play-in tournament. That to me is the goal.
And you get into that play-in tournament, and most likely you're taking on the number 2 seed, which is not necessarily bad for the Golden State Warriors. I think we talked about how Minnesota and OKC stack up much better than that of having to face the Denver Nuggets in the first round. All right, for my man, Evan Giddings, this is Dan Devone for Warriors This Week. It's the All-Star break. We're back after it next week when the Warriors return to action against Thursday in Charlotte. We'll be back a week from today to talk all about it here on Warriors This Week. Enjoy the afternoon, everybody. So long.
So, how's your research going?
Surprising! After I figured out the top-rated TVs in our price range, I went shopping for deals.
And who's the